Good morning, everyone. We are now in session 2 of the Pilipinas Conference 2020 with the theme Towards Green Economic Recovery, Designing Climate Resilient and Sustainable Communities. I am Ludwig Federigan. I am your host for this morning. To provide the opening remarks and the keynote address, may we welcome Professor Dindo Manhit, President of Strat-Based ADR Institute.
Thank you, Ludwig. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to, I think we had a little over 280 registrants for this session. We had a good session yesterday, and I welcome you all on this session 2 towards green economic recovery, designing climate resilient and sustainable communities. Allow me to start the session by sharing what we have tracked since the start of this year, even before the declaration of the global pandemic. What we saw as 8 pandemic risks, and key to this pandemic risk is really what I would call this morning global warming or even global weirding, a term that I came across maybe 2 decades ago. And it asks for a need for climate action, environmental stewardship, and a green economic recovery beyond this global pandemic. We have seen how the Philippines has been regarded as one of the countries that are most vulnerable to natural disasters. We have seen it not only in recent years, but even in recent months due to climate change. And the latest study of the World Risk Index, out of 180 countries assessed, the Philippines ranked as a 9th riskiest country in terms of disasters. It speaks of high level of risk in terms of sea level rise, cyclones, earthquakes. However, the Philippines' disaster resilience policy remained reactionary rather than anticipatory in its attempt to mitigate the impact of natural disasters. And we need to promote climate resilience and sustainable communities. Evident that urban and emerging urban areas are becoming hubs for economic and industrial activities. It contributes to the country's socioeconomic growth, but it could cause the downfall of unsustainable planned and managed. For a country that is already highly vulnerable to natural disasters and has a large proportion of population living in poverty, resilience requires quick on-the-ground preparations, mitigations, and adaptations. Communities at the local level need to plan with green designs that are based on sustainability principles and investments that not only generate more jobs, spur the economy, and minimize costs, but also protects the environment. Here in Strat-Based ADR Institute, as far back as 2013, we have advocated environmental stewardship. It promotes a whole of society approach in addressing the long-term threat of climate change. Only with a whole of society approach can this desired outcome be achieved and swiftly integrate genuine sustainability into all aspects of people's lives. Collectively, it uplifts the lifestyle, reduces the poverty, and contributes to the inclusive socio-economic development of our nation. Just last month, in our online publication, our October occasional paper, we argued with even a title, Building Back to Green Economic Recovery. An inclusive and quality health system energy transition, environmental protection, and strategic partnerships between government and the private sector, between local governments and the private sectors, are cornerstones for a green economic recovery. It allows us to improve the standard of life, inclusive development, and an overall healthy environment. Again, thank you for joining us in today's session. And I welcome also our panelists who I believe can really share a lot of things, a lot of ideas, insightful that we need with a green economic recovery. Ludwig, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dindo. This session is actually divided into two parts. The first part would be the need for science-based decision-making, and the second part would be a whole-of-society approach for climate and disaster resilience. To start off with part number one, in this part, we expect policymakers should ensure that every decision made is based on science and the most updated information and data. Science not only provides us with the necessary data we need to better understand our environment, but also the possible solutions to these challenges. Our first speaker for part one will discuss the role of the public sector in promoting green investments. Being very active in issues concerning natural resources, energy, and governance, Representative Barsaga has emphasized that the public sector has to take a leadership role and facilitate the transition to a green economy that is more climate resilient and sustainable. The public sector is in strong position to set the agenda and establish policies that would advance environmental stewardship among industries and the citizens. Let us all welcome Representative Elpidio Barsaga Jr., Chairperson of the House Committee on Natural Resources and National President of the National Union Party.
Good morning. It is indeed a privilege to be invited as one of the resource persons. Okay na ba? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Kong.
Oh, can I continue?
Yes po.
Okay, good morning. It is indeed a great privilege to be given the opportunity to speak before this forum. As the chairman of the Committee on Natural Resources in the 18th Congress, my committee continues to act upon vital legislative measures that seek to protect and conserve the country's rich natural resources. Among my priority measures are actually the sustainable forest management and the wildlife resource measures. The Sustainable Forest Management Act intends to provide the policy direction in the formulation of strategies and programs for the protection and sustainable management of forest lands, as well as to organize the utilization of forest resources to support sustainable development in the country by providing adequate access and benefit sharing to the shareholders. Among its key provision is the adoption of the Sustainable Forest Management Policy Framework. While utilizing watersheds as the basic reference landscape in the development and management of reforestation, plantation development, biodiversity conservation, ecotourism, renewable energy, and other related activities. It seeks to pursue community-based forest management approach in managing forests for poverty alleviation and sustainability, and ensures the participation of all sectors of society in such approach. It also creates a community-based forest law enforcement team from representatives of stakeholders in a particular watershed. The Forest Management Agreement, a contract by and between the state and qualified persons for the exploration, development, and utilization of forest lands and forest resources is also introduced. The measure also provides for a sustainable forest development fund to serve as concessional financing, particularly for forest development projects proposed by qualified managers of the forest management units. Most recently, we have seen the power of nature with the latest devastation on the property and lives of our countrymen like in Cagayan and Isabela. The key is appropriate utilization of our natural resources and responsible use. The Forests and the Trees Act, help us against and prevent massive floodings, and watershed help sustain our water needs. Improper and unsuitable use of these resources to result to what we have just witnessed in our country just recently. The Wildlife Resource Conservation Act, on the other hand, is not only a very timely as the entire world grapples with the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, the cause of which is being traced to illegal wildlife trafficking. The measure intends not only to regulate the collection, possession, use, and trade of wildlife products and derivatives, but also address, if not to eradicate, transnational organized crimes of wildlife trade and trafficking. It provides for stiffer penalties, increasing fines and imprisonment for illegal acts, and for escalation of fines every 3 years without the need of any new legislation. Syndicated wildlife trafficking is imposed a much higher penalty. It also expands the existing list of illegal acts to include attempting to trade wildlife byproducts and or derivatives, including advertising, contracting, or offering for the purpose of sale or procurement of wildlife byproducts and or derivatives apart from actual trade of wildlife, dumping detrimental to critical habitat aside from dumping and treasure hunting and prospecting. It also penalizes wildlife laundering and destruction of wildlife habitat. Wildlife laundering pertains to how wildlife traders discuss the origin and ownership of illegally acquired wildlife by making such appear to have been derived from a legitimate source to circumvent wildlife laws and regulations. In relation to this, during the Asian Interparliamentary Briefing on the origins of COVID-19, preventing future pandemics and wildlife trade held in June last year, I raised the issue of how to provide effective and stringent penalties to deter and eradicate illegal wildlife trade and help to prevent future pandemics such as COVID-19. In addition to these two important measures, my Committee on Natural Resources has also addressed issues pertaining to mining and the Manila Bay rehabilitation. It has directed the creation of a technical working group which discussed small-scale mining issues and concerns to help facilitate possible introduction of reforms to the small-scale mining in the country and amendments to Republic Act 7076 or the People's Small Mining Act of 1991. In one of my early initiatives as chairperson of the Committee on Natural Resources, knowing what has been done on Manila Bay and the cleanup of water tributaries leading to it, as ordered by the President and by the continuing mandamus issued by the Supreme Court directing concerned government agencies and private entities to rehabilitate the Manila Bay, I ask for the update regarding this project. The committee has then, to this effect, conducted 3 meetings with the private agencies and concerned government institutions to ensure proper rehabilitation of the Manila Bay. In the exercise of each legislative oversight function, the committee will also conduct an inquiry on black sand mining and dredging at the mouth of the Cagayan River. This is not a knee-jerk reaction to what has just happened with the massive flooding in Cagayan and Isabela. But we must do now what we have to do. We can no longer stand idly and watch Mother Nature backlash while some people and groups continue with their illegal ways and abuse of the country's natural resources. By profession, I am a lawyer. I was a practicing lawyer for a period of 22 years and also a law professor. Based on my experience and as a member of Congress, I can say that we might have the best possible laws addressing the environment and our natural resources. But the enactment of the law is not sufficient. Above all, it is necessary that the laws must be properly observed. And if the law will not be properly observed, the next step to be done by the authorities will be enforcement of the laws. And that will include the filing of the appropriate cases, including the conviction of the offenders. Unfortunately, it is sad today that insofar as enforcement and prosecution of the offenders are concerned, we have a very low batting average. The effects on the devastation of our natural resources, including the damage done to our people, has been experienced for a long period of time. I was reading the newspaper dailies this morning and I've seen the headline of the Inquirer that although Storm Ulysses has already passed the country for a period of more than 1 week, Laguna Lakeshore villages are still under water. And it is also very heartening to see that in the Philippine Star this morning, there is a caption saying the ILG, some mayors involved in illegal logging and mining. I have been a former mayor for a period of 12 years. As a lawyer and as a politician, I know for a fact that mayors and governors are part of the executive department whose primary duty under our Constitution is the execution of laws. But if we read statements coming from the Secretary of DILG that even the public officials, the mayors and the governors are engaged in illegal logging and illegal mining, perhaps it is about time to set an example that this public official should be prosecuted. The problem has long been existing, and as stated ago, our reaction is always reactionary. We don't have to anticipate the problem because we have experienced that for a number of years. The Philippines has a typhoon of approximately 29 to 30 years. Shall it be good to say that next year we can expect that what we have experienced right now would again occur? And perhaps this is a case where immediate action is necessary in order to protect lives and also to protect our environment and our natural resources. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much, Representative Barsaga. Thank you for highlighting the work of your committee and the importance of forest and wildlife in our ecosystem. Our next speaker have worked in the environment sector for almost 20 years. She has been advocating for investments in environment-centered and science-based research and development to create better systems and structures that can respond to the climate crisis. She has also emphasized that there is a need to deal with the climate change by structuring systems and redesigning stimulus packages towards investing in a nature-based solution to ensure long-term impact and sustainability. To talk about nature-based solutions for a green economic recovery, let us all welcome Undersecretary Annalisa Te of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources.
Okay, maraming salamat, Ludwig. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Can I request for the sharing of my slides? So siguro while waiting for the slides, can see how the country has, as mentioned by Congressman Barsaga, was devastated due to the series of typhoons, including Ulysses, which showed our vulnerability as a country. We are number 3 in the ranking in the disaster risk index, and this situation is even more challenging because of the multiplier effect of climate change and man-made activities that affect the environment. So thank you for giving opportunity for the government to share with you nature-based solutions for green recovery. Okay, so okay. Next slide, please. So during the during the 75th UN General Assembly, President Rodrigo Duterte emphasized that the same urgency needed to fight COVID-19 is needed to address the climate crisis. And he said that this is a global challenge that has worsened existing inequalities and vulnerabilities from within and between nations. DNR Secretary Roy Sumato, on the other hand, during the Press State of the Nation Address report of the Cabinet Cluster on SICAM DRR last July 2020, highlighted that climate emergency remains urgent as ever. It is like the COVID-19 emergency, just in slow motion and much graver. In the ministerial meeting of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action last October 2020, DOF Secretary Carlos Dominguez said, unlike COVID-19, for which a vaccine will likely be produced soon, there is no quick solution for the climate crisis. He said that we need to act now with the same sense of urgency that we have for the ongoing pandemic. COVID-19 and the recent climate disasters have shown that we must step up investment in preparedness now instead of waiting for the next crisis to hit. The choice is clear: delay and pay or plan and prosper. We know that investing in disaster preparedness is worth it, both in terms of human lives saved and economic returns. Research by the Global Commission on Adaptation, for example, shows that benefit to cost ratios for climate adaptation investments range from 2:1 to 10:1. Preparing for major shocks involves substantial outlays. Building resilience to climate impacts could cost $140 to $300 billion annually by 2030, while meeting World Health Organization minimum standards for pandemic preparedness will require up to $3.4 billion per year. But these sums are small compared to the cost of not being prepared. Natural disasters already cost hundreds of billions of dollars a year. With a 2-degree centigrade increase in temperature, according to one estimate, damages from climate change could reach $69 trillion by 2100, and the human cost is high too. An analysis found that doing nothing could increase the number of people who need international humanitarian aid because of floods, storms, droughts, and wildfires every year. Currently, it's 108 million and expected to increase by 50% by 2030 and could nearly double to 200 million people by 2050. And accordingly, one of the most important things that governments can do today is invest in better collection and analysis of data on the disaster risks that the countries respective countries will face. Simply having 24 hours notice of a storm's arrival or foreknowledge of an impending heat wave can cut the resulting losses by 30%, while spending $800 million on early warning systems in developing countries could actually save 3 to 6, $16 billion per year. In the Cabinet Cluster on Climate Change Adaptation Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction meeting held last May 2020, Secretary Roy Simato, as the chair, instructed NEDA, Climate Change Commission, and DNR to formulate a green recovery plan. When we say green recovery, it's one that integrates economic recovery from COVID-19, climate action, and sustainable development. Let me just share with you a study released in May 2020. It's entitled, Will COVID-19 Fiscal Recovery Packages Accelerate or Retard Progress on Climate Change? It surveyed more than 200 of the world's most senior economists and economic officials from finance ministries, central banks, and other leading organizations. It tested 25 physical policy types in terms of one, how long it takes to have an economic impact, and two, the effect of the investments on longer-term national income measured by the economic multiplier. The bubbles in the diagram represent the 19, in the interest of time, I was just showing 19 recovery policies. The horizontal axis shows the multiplier. These are the policies with higher long-run economic multipliers have greater economic impact per dollar spent. The vertical axis shows the potential climate impact, and the color represents the speed. The lighter the color means faster. Faster policies achieve their desired economic impact more quickly, and policies with positive climate impact are likely to support efforts to achieve net zero emissions. And the size of bubble show the number of experts rating policy in top 10. So in the upper right-hand quadrant, I hope you can see that from your screen, shows the most preferred or desirable policy based on the survey. So these are S, connectivity infrastructure investment; X, general R&D spending; L, education investment; Y, clean R&D spending; T, clean energy infrastructure investment; and portion of N on worker retraining, and portion of M on healthcare investment. So these are the policies perceived to have a high economic multiplier and strong potential to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. So in summary, these are the 5 recommendations that emerged from the study. 1, clean physical infrastructure investment; building efficiency spending for renovations and retrofits; investments in education and training; natural capital investment for ecosystem resilience and regeneration; and 5, clean research and development investment. So can we skip the next 2 slides and go to nature-based solutions? Okay. Green recovery is not just about cutting greenhouse gas emissions, but also of nurturing ecosystems that can draw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And nature-based solutions is where we use the forces of nature itself to achieve economic resilience for food and water security, which means enhancing watershed management, reduced physical risks, which includes flood control, coastal protection, and ecosystems health, and reduce carbon emissions through carbon sequestration and avoided emissions. According to an estimate, nature-based solutions investments can actually create an estimated 39.7 full-time equivalent jobs per $1 million invested, or over 10 times the job creation rate of investments in fossil fuels. Okay, the next 4 slides refer to the Interagency Task Force Anti-COVID-19 Priority Response and Recovery Strategy. So let me just run through them. Training on health and safety measures for wildlife caretakers and waste collectors, wildlife handling protocols implementation, establishment of additional wildlife sanctuaries for rescued wildlife. Next, implementing a comprehensive bioprospecting and biotechnology program to facilitate discovery and development of compounds and derivatives for pharmaceutical purposes. R&D programs for early detection and rapid response to manage new viruses and other organisms and its relationship to the environment. Agroforestry, agroforestry development programs in affected rural communities to support food production and watershed protection, biodiversity-friendly and sustainable alternative livelihood programs to avoid over-extraction of natural resources. Also providing additional budget support for digital technologies or computer applications for forest management in terms of surveying, mapping, and planning. Upgrading of our existing data infrastructures in the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Operations Center, such as GIS, monitoring instruments, forecasting, and early warning geolocation technologies. Part of nature-based solutions are low carbon development interventions, which are central to achieving green recovery, one of which is planning for urban green development, regeneration, and sustainable spaces. No? Relative to this, we have the Green program of the Department of Budget and Management, which provides assistance to local government units so they can create more forest parks, arboretum, botanical gardens, improve the livability of urban areas, no? Transform streetscapes through installation of eco-friendly street furniture, fixtures, and shading. For energy, for transportation, we have the low carbon transport system on public utility modernization, motor vehicle inspection system program, bus rapid transit projects, LRT East Extension Project, the Cavite Extension Project, the MRT Line 7 project to promote mass transportation and prevent or address the traffic congestion problem. Then for energy, it is being driven, if we can tackle these challenges of air pollution and climate change by energy efficiency schemes on low-cost housing, support for retrofits, low-energy buildings, rural green infrastructure projects such as grid expansion and off-grid rural electrification, solar lighting, promoting eco-stoves and biogas to improve living standards in disadvantaged communities. We also need resilience building recovery interventions through resilient infrastructures for coastal protection and flood defense, and rolling out policy reforms to enhance resilience, such as a payment for ecosystem services scheme. Also, in the aspect of agriculture, we need to support resilience building measures such as water resource conservation, reforestation, shift to sustainable and resilient production, and risk-sensitive land use management. Major component of the green recovery is promoting circular economy, where we minimize resource use by maintaining value in already produced materials and products and recirculate them back into the economy once they become waste, creating more sustainable livelihoods while reducing threats to environment and health, and action to promote source-to-sea solutions to reduce marine plastic pollution. The government has already developed the National Action Plan on Marine Litter. So just to show you, these are some of the program activities and strategies. Okay. Now, one of the major investments that we should do is on research and innovation. Research and development support can greatly enhance the growth potential of recovery investments. New technologies can be facilitated by bold government R&D programs, as what China and Germany demonstrated with wind and solar energy after 2008 financial crisis. So we can look into international efforts to support new energy sources such as green hydrogen and better batteries, alongside with a range of nature-based solutions to achieve lower costs and more resilient infrastructure. As we deal with the response to the pandemic, climate change, disaster, and recovery path, we can actually transform these challenges into opportunities, because this situation provides us the opportunity to rethink, reevaluate our directions, our choices for the economy, for the environment, and for humanity. Um, we need to see clear signs that the pandemic and our societal response to it will lead to significant and permanent changes in the path of future global emissions. We need to analyze our responses to pandemic through a climate lens. Um, and so, as we pursue green recovery, we need both significant government policies and important personal behavior changes. No, um, as we can see during this pandemic, we changed our habits from cutting down on food waste, reducing non-essential consumption, and we need that to under our green recovery. We need to alter our lifestyle. So the next succeeding slides are actually some suggestions on how we can do uh, cultural and behavior shift. Perhaps let's move on slide 41. Um, I can see actually. Okay, next slide, please. Can move. Next slide. Next, 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 next. Yeah. Okay, so as you can see here, in the study, 1.5-degree lifestyles, targets, and options for reducing lifestyle carbon footprints. These are some of the things that we can do so that we can reduce our carbon footprint from 500 kilos to over 1,500 kilos per option, no, per year. Next slide. If you want to reduce our options from 250 kilos to 500 kilos, these are the things that we can do: ride sharing, living closer to workplace, car-free commuting, alternative dairy products, etc. And from, if less than 250 kilos per option per year, these are the things that we can do: telework, reduction of food loss, saving of hot water. But for us to be able to do this, there should be a combination of system-wide changes and groundswell of actions from individuals and households. So the climate crisis has not gone away, and our response cannot be put on hold. The enormous impact of the COVID-19 crisis on human well-being and health cannot allow the world to be diverted from a strong response to the climate and nature crisis. If anything, it reinforces the urgency of that response. So after the devastating effect of Ulysses, the need for investments in nature-based solutions for resilience, policy reform, and capacity building to building resilience become more evident. And when we say resilience, it does not necessarily mean about bouncing back to the status quo, but the ability to shift and adapt to a fundamental shift in circumstances. Community resilience describes the sustained ability of communities to withstand, adapt to, and recover from adversity. Community resilience must be at the heart of a green recovery, and it requires integrating sustainable measures in government policies, programs, and plans to achieve transformational changes in health, climate, environment, and the eradication of poverty in all its forms. And that is what we are working hard on with the support and participation of various sectors and stakeholders. Maraming salamat po. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Yusek Te. Response, recovery, resilience. Indeed, transformation is a continued process. It's a continuing process. So next in our line of speakers this morning, amidst the increasing frequency of climate and natural disasters, it is becoming more possible to better prepare and mitigate its effect through valuable, innovative technologies. Our speaker, through Project NOAA, has been working to raise Filipinos' awareness of natural hazards. He has also emphasized that increasing awareness of disaster risk is key in cultivating a culture of preparedness and reducing the catastrophic impacts of extreme hazardous events. Let us all welcome Dr. Mahal Magmay, Executive Director of the University of the Philippines Resilient Institute, who will discuss with us disaster preparation and mitigation.
Hello, uh, Good morning.
Morning, Doc.
I'll be sharing my screen. Please tell me if it's already on. Can the screen be seen?
Yes, Doc.
All right. I was asked to make a presentation. The title was Disaster Preparation and Mitigation. So I put parentheses in preparation because the talk is really about prevention and mitigation, what we need to do long before disaster strikes. Because the terms preparation, prevention and mitigation, response and recovery has very specific meanings in the field of disaster risk reduction. And the RRMC classifies or categorizes the framework on disaster risk reduction according to the following. So we have the first part, the green that you see in the pie diagram, which refers to prevention and mitigation. The blue, which is preparedness, which is really about being prepared hours before or days before a disaster strikes or a hazard strikes. And then we have the rehabilitation and, response part, which is during the event or immediately after event. And of course, for longer term response, we have the rehabilitation and recovery. The talk that I'll be giving will really be about prevention and mitigation, which is long-term action before disaster strikes. And NDRMC has put much emphasis on that rather than just 1/4 of the pie. They made it 1/2 because with lots of efforts on prevention and mitigation, we are able to avoid a lot of impact. So basically what we're talking about here is long-term preparations, what we need to do in building community resilience, including resilience against the adverse impacts of climate change. So we talk about prevention and mitigation, which is really about the long-term things that we need to do, the actions that we need to do to be able to avoid disasters. Now, NOAA, which is now the core component of the UP Resilience Institute, emphasizes two very important things in our prevention and mitigation efforts. What we need to do are the following. Number one, we need to follow probabilistic hazards assessment, which leads to probabilistic risk assessment. And number two, which is about open data. In fact, StratBase commissioned us to write a document, a policy note on this. It's available. It was published by StratBase, ADR. And the title is An Open Data Law for Disaster Risk Reduction. One may Google that. It's available in Prevention Web, UNISDR website. And it's also available in other websites. Now, what do we mean by probabilistic hazards assessment? When we talk about probabilistic risk assessment, we really talk about multiple scenarios of a particular hazard, not multi-hazards. We have to go beyond that. We have to go beyond the historical record. What you're seeing in this figure is a type of hazard called as a flood hazard. That needs to be shown to the community, get everybody to be aware of the hazards in their neighborhood. And to be able to get them to become aware of the hazards, they need hazard maps, like what is shown. But the business of hazards mapping is not really to identify the hazards. It is meant to make use or identify the hazards, for us to be able to show to the people in the community the safest places in their area. Because if there's a warning given by the warning agencies, people must know how to respond. If they don't know how to respond, if they can't identify the safest places in their area, then no amount of warning will suffice in preventing a disaster because the people will not take action for lack of knowledge on where to go. So the key takeaway message there is that uh, in disaster risk reduction, there has to be appropriate warning that is reliable, understandable, accurate, and most of all, timely. But that needs to be matched by the appropriate response of the people. The people in the community need to be aware as well of where the hazards are, but more than that, they need to know where to evacuate. And identifying the safest places would be appropriate to use in the response phase. Now, here it's written historical worst case scenario. Whenever we hear disaster victims get interviewed, they always say, this is the first time that this happened. We've never seen such a flood this high. This is the first time landslides happened here in this area. That only goes to tell us that we failed to anticipate the bigger events than what we remember or what the community has experienced. It's bigger than the historical worst case scenario. We need to go beyond that. We need to use science. We need to use powerful computers, get the knowledge on the physics of the flow of water, the physics of the stability of rocks, which generate landslides, incorporated in the planning process of the community, especially with climate change, things that are projected to be worse than what we have experienced, they need to be visualized. And to be able to visualize that, you need to make use of science and the most advanced technologies. What you're seeing here are multi-scenario maps, which is exactly what probabilistic hazards assessment means. Now, if we have multiple scenarios, we get to visualize and understand the problems that are bigger than what we have experienced, bigger than the historical record. You're seeing multiple scenarios of floods, one that is moderate, others which are much bigger. And we need to incorporate that into the planning of communities. Planning of communities, mainstreaming this information, this knowledge, if it is used by the people in the community, for appropriate response when there's a warning. Now, what you're seeing here is the type of map that typically is being used for most of the 1,364 or 1,634 cities and municipalities of the country, which is a map largely based on anecdotal accounts and scientific, subjective opinion, rather, of scientists. So it's up to the worst case historical record. The yellow means low landslide susceptibility. Green refers to moderate flood susceptibility. Violet refers to high flood susceptibility. And the apple green color is low flood susceptibility. So this is an actual case in Leyte. When we ask them where to put the evacuation center, they say, let's put this here. The reason why they agreed to put it there, or they say that to put it there, is because they haven't experienced a flood in that area. But if we use multiple scenarios or probabilistic hazard maps using powerful computers and simulating the physics of the flow of water, or simulating the flow of water, a flood that is of moderate height or low height would agree to the accounts of the people. But come the time when we have climate change scenarios or an event that is bigger than what the people remember, the flood map shows that, they are in danger. And if you cite an evacuation center there, and that time comes when the bigger event than what they remember happens, then they would die. Or probably not all will die if there are survivors. and we interview them, they would say again that, oh, this flood has never happened here before. This is the first time we've seen a flood to happen here before. So that example, which is an actual example in Leyte, we found out is the same for many of the cities and municipalities that we have worked with. We need to put in the bigger events that they have not experienced, bigger than the historical record, and we can only do that through the use of powerful computers, frontier science, and the most advanced technologies. We need to mainstream that into the planning process, not just for siting evacuation centers, but also for planning the community in terms of the different sectors. It must cut across all sectors. Sectors of agriculture, coastal, water, health. We've been seeing the pandemic, we're having problems there, and it's affecting all of the other sectors. So we need to plan it as well, include it in the planning process of the community. Forestry, biodiversity, environment, energy, education, tourism, infrastructure, settlement, and even mining. So we need to mainstream all of those probabilistic hazard maps into the planning process, because if we do not, we will be surprised when that time comes, when the bigger event happens, we come unprepared. And when we are surprised and we are unprepared, disasters happen. Now, there's also such a thing called as risk knowledge, monitoring and warning service, dissemination and communication, and response capability. Our concept of early warning is the warning given by our mandated government agencies. Like when a typhoon is coming days in advance, there are forecasts, there's a warning. Prepare for floods and landslides. And when there's a volcanic eruption days before or weeks before, we are warned that there's going to be an eruption, supposedly. But the real early warning system is called, or should be, a people-centered early warning system. It must involve the systematic collection of data, the use of science, understanding the risk in a community, and also that requires a lot of knowledge building. That's why research and development is very important in our disaster risk reduction efforts. Monitoring and warning, that is the job of government, really doing accurate, reliable, understandable, and timely forecasts, which are hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound. That is what we lost during Ulysses. We were not able to do that hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound warnings. So we need to do that kind of monitoring service and warning service using the best technologies that are available. And the third is communicating risk. Media is very important in getting the people in far-flung areas to know about the forecast. But it's also important to build the knowledge amongst people in the community through education. We can use the arts, we can use music, we can use sculptures, we can use literature, poetry, to get that information come across to people in the community to raise disaster awareness. What we need to do really is to build that kind of buy-in, wherein disaster awareness is really part of the belief or the culture of the community, because we need them to believe in their actions. There must be ownership, and to build that, it must be ingrained in their culture. It's very important that we understand that when they take action, it should not be about discipline, because discipline is something that you do without belief. But if the knowledge, the awareness is part of the normal belief or the culture of the community, when they take action, it is with belief. The fourth part is response capability. The government needs to help those poor municipalities to have the capability to adapt and resist adversity, to build resilience. And that is a big task to do. And it's the responsibility not just of government, but everybody, including all of us. So that is the people-centered early warning system that I think many people should understand, because the problem, all of the threats that we have, uh, including all of the hazards, typhoon-related hazards, severe weather-related hazards, as well as the geological hazards, must be part of the efforts of the entire community. It has to be a whole of society approach. Now, if we are talking about science-based approaches, and if we are talking about what do you call this, a whole of society approach, we have to have open data. Why? Because in disaster risk reduction, we need to work with scientists and engineers to generate a lot of the information and the processing of data. But beyond that, we need the people to embrace the science and the knowledge. So we need to work with the artists, the people in the humanities, people in the social scientists, psychologists, to understand the mindset of the Filipino people, the behavior of the Filipino people, because they have their own beliefs. We need sociologists and anthropologists for that. And of course, people in the physical sciences. So that is interdisciplinary work. But we need, again, to mainstream all of that information to get the people aware of all of this knowledge, because it will only become, or information, because it will only transform into knowledge if it is useful to them. For us to be able to do that, we need to work with the LGUs, the NGOs, the NGAs, the crowd, and stakeholders. And if we are to talk about science and a whole of society approach, by definition, science needs to be repeatable, replicable. So without data being open to everybody, if data remains in silos, our generation of knowledge is limited, and the trust in science gets diminished. We need that trust to be able to communicate, because if we don't have trust in that science, because it is not replicable, because data is kept in silos or kept away from those who want to test it, then we lose that ability to communicate because there is lack of trust. Science, by definition, needs to be trusted. And to be trusted, what we demand for people to do based on science, as we say, should be trusted. So it's very, very difficult to communicate if there is no trust in science. So we need open data for that, to be able to get that definition of science workable. Open data, open science, open source, open access, open knowledge, and open government is highly important if we are to talk about science-based approaches and a whole of society approach. So basically, for disaster prevention and mitigation, and for all of the other categories of effective disaster risk reduction, we identify two fundamental things. One is that we must do probabilistic risk assessment, and two, we must have open data. Without that, I believe that year after year, we will succumb to all of the harsh impacts. We will be, what we call it, sitting ducks against the impacts of hazards that threaten all barangays of the country, whatever that hazard may be. Thank you very much. Oh, before I end, we are doing this for certain LGUs, including the city of Manila. I heard that Mayor Isko is part of this webinar or conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lagmay, and thank you for highlighting the need for science and trusting science. Our next speaker will discuss on integrating a science-based approach in understanding and mitigating the ecological impacts of plastic pollution in the Philippine waters. As the COVID-19 pandemic takes its toll on public health, people resort to single-use plastics for sanitation and safety purposes. However, this has also raised concerns on the already existing waste management problem. Our next speaker has emphasized that the issue of plastic as an emerging threat adds to the long list of our problems. Unlike other issues, however, plastic pollution is reversible, but would need participation from all stakeholders, from its production to its consumption and its management and reuse, from knowledge to action, and from the scientific community to the larger public. Let us all welcome Dr. Deo Florence Onda, the Associate Professor and Deputy Director for Research of the University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute.
Sorry for that. Good morning, everyone. Can you actually hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
Professor.
yes, we can hear you.
Yes, okay, thank you. So thank you again to Stratbase for the invitation to actually share some perspective on a national or global problem that we are experiencing right now, and that would be on plastics pollution. So I would like to echo some of the call that Dr. Lagmay actually made in his presentation, the importance of science-based approaches in decision making and in implementing policies that are rooted in data and hard science. So my talk will mainly focus on plastics pollution, its framework, and the status that we have in the Philippines in terms of research to understand the problem. So you've seen this many times. Plastics is a problem primarily because it is a synthetic material that is also derived from another source of greenhouse gas, which is the fossil fuel. And I think mainly some of or many of the problems that we are experiencing with plastics pollution is associated with the mismanagement of the single-use plastics, which consists around 42% of the plastics that is actually being produced globally. And if we are going to talk about the plastics in the ocean, we need to understand where they are actually coming from. So in a global study using a data in 2010, they suggested that around 275 million metric tons of plastics are actually being produced on land, and 3% of this would end up in the ocean. So the question is how, why, and what are the processes that are involved in for its occurrence, and then why is it actually happening? So using this framework, we can actually see that we have a source, which is the land, and the sink, the ocean, being the ultimate storage and sink of the plastics pollution. If we also wanted to understand the implications of plastics pollution, we need to appreciate the fact that plastics is directly affecting and negatively impacting the environment. And we as human beings, part of a global and larger ecology, we depend on the environment as our resource. The ecological services that are being rendered by the environment are the ones that we are using and we are benefiting from, translating into economic gains. So what is the how do plastics actually affect this ecological service economic gain relationship? So plastics is affecting almost all environments right now, from land, where accumulation of plastics are found in landfills and dump sites, and then resulting to leaching, resulting to land degradation, which could then affect agricultural and ecological potential, also posing health risks not only to humans but also to other organisms. And then from land, it would leach into the riverine system, the freshwater environment, which could affect its local biota, affecting the fisheries, affecting the local ecosystems, posing health risks to human and animals. And also now we are seeing the effect of plastic accumulation and flood waste that could actually result into disaster, directly affecting human security. And then from rivers, they then lead to the oceans. They then get transported into the oceanic and marine environment, where they accumulate. They help in the dispersal of different species, affecting local biota, affecting the fisheries, affecting the local ecosystem processes, as well as the global biogeochemical cycle. So plastics indeed are actually affecting each and every environment in different ways, but ultimately negatively influencing ecological processes. And recent studies have also shown that plastics are not just on land or sea or freshwater environments anymore. The air that we breathe are actually already contaminated by marine or by microplastics or nanoplastics, and we are inhaling them. So it's also posing risks to us in terms of our health. So all of this effects ultimately will lead to, at some extent, ecological degradation in the different environment. And again, ecological in the environment gives us ecological services, and ecological services translate into economic gains. What will happen then to us if this ecological degradation continue to occur because of continuing plastics pollution? So ecological degradation will then lead or mean negative socioeconomic impacts and hazards, directly affecting human lives and human security. So how do we actually approach this problem? If we have plastics in land, in river, in oceans, and air, we need to understand and we need to recognize the source and sink dynamics of plastics pollution. Source meaning that the plastics are actually produced and also released from the land and then get transported into the oceans. Using this framework, what we need to actually address the problem, especially in the Philippines, is a ridge to reef approach, recognizing the fact that whatever is happening on the ridge or in the mountains will ultimately affect the rivers and then will ultimately affect the reef ecosystems or the marine environment. However, if we want to actually understand the environmental implication of plastics, we cannot and we should not dissociate humans. We are the very source of plastics pollution, but we can also be the first step on how to prevent plastics pollution actually from happening. So when we talk about humans, we should talk about production, we should talk about consumption, and we should talk about how we manage waste or how we actually mismanage the waste. So this is the human environment continuum, how humans are actually affecting the environment. This is important, especially on the management part, which links the human and the environment continuum, because studies show that uh, 20% of the plastics that we find in the oceans are actually from ocean-based sources, meaning from ghost nets, from illegal dumping in the seas, from the ships. But 80% are actually from land-based sources. They're actually released from land. And ultimately, all of this will actually go into the oceans where they sink and get stored and affect the natural ecosystems. However, for the land-based resources, 25% are actually from managed waste, but a large portion of it, 75%, are from uncollected and mismanaged waste. 75%, and this is a big number. And this is relevant for the Philippines primarily because EMB of DNR itself reported that around 65% of dump sites in the Philippines are considered illegal. So illegal means it's unregulated, it's not par at standards, it is not being monitored. Therefore, the likelihood of the plastics and the trash that are actually deposited into these illegal dump sites would be higher, would likely to actually be transported into the river and then in the marine environment. Therefore, also increasing the possibility of land to ocean leakage. And the problem in the Philippines is that we are only accounting for the managed or the ones we are collecting, but we don't actually monitor and account for the mismanaged ones. So in several papers, it has been highlighted, the Yambik paper 2015, that the Philippines is actually the third largest marine plastic contributor. That paper was published in 2015, but the recent paper just this year in 2020 showed that it is actually Indonesia, India, and the USA that are the three most contributor to plastics pollution after they revalidated and then reprocessed the data and considered also other factors. So these are the three most contributing countries in terms of marine plastics pollution. But the thing is that the Philippines is still part of the top 10, along with Egypt, Brazil, China, Japan, Thailand, and Russia. So we are still a significant contributor relative to this study. So going back to this human environment continuum from production to mismanagement, if we want to understand how are we going to mitigate or how are we going to solve the problem in plastics pollution, we need to understand each and every step on the journey of the plastics from human to the marine environment. The mismanagement and the management of waste is an important step because it connects the human use to actually the environment. So we can classify it as the pre-mis or management and the post-management. And everything before management takes place, those are the things that we can actually prevent, including reduction in production, reduction or change in behavior of consumption, and also improvement of our management practices. However, we also need to acknowledge the fact that many plastics have already been released into the marine environment or released into the environment in general. And these are the things that we can only mitigate. I remember having a discussion with Professor Manhit, Dindo Manhit, about this. If the word reversible is actually applicable in this situation, can we actually reverse the effects of plastics pollution? It's something that is really difficult to answer for now because primarily we don't understand a lot about plastics pollution. And in the Philippines, at least this is my personal opinion on this, many of the initiatives, the policies, the projects, the programs that we have are actually focused only on those what we can prevent before the miss or management of the plastics pollution. I think also I'm happy to see that the USECTEP presented the NTOA for plastics pollution. But if you're going to look at the 6 major objectives, 1 to 5 were actually focused on this, on the prevention. Rightly so, because we needed to prevent it from happening. However, we also need to acknowledge the fact that there are already plastics out there, that it is already negatively affecting our marine environment and resources. And we also need to understand that, especially for an archipelagic country like the Philippines, which is very dependent on the marine resources. So I put a question mark there. What have we been doing, or what can we actually do to mitigate these effects? For me, it remains a black box. You know, I've been working on this topic for several years now and also working with different government agencies and NGOs and stakeholders. But this part of how are we going to mitigate, what are we going to do with the plastics that are already out there remains a black box. We have no or limited studies on this. We have no or limited data, therefore lack of understanding, and therefore no basis for sound policies. Again, most of the policies that we have were actually on the prevention side, but not on the post-management side. And where do science comes in? Research and development, scientific research and studies. It is hard to tackle an issue if we do not know how it happens. It is hard to make policies if we actually don't understand the phenomena. So we really need to understand how it's happening. Science will allow us to make the problem tangible, understand the phenomena. We will have more basis for sound and appropriate policies. It will lead to innovation for long-lasting and sustainable solutions, and it can actually translate solutions to action, prevention to mitigation. So that's one thing that we are doing at the Marine Science Institute. I think this is the first nationally funded research program on plastics in the marine environment. We're looking at the effects of plastics in the marine environment, trophic systems, how it's affecting our aquaculture and our fisheries, health risks, and how it's affecting the environment and the public in general. So the project will actually start next year and is funded by the DOST and NRCP. I'd also like to emphasize, because plastics is affecting directly the diversity and the ecological services of the environment, we need to also include it or consider it as part of as a matter of national security, along with along with the biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. It is a matter of environmental crisis. So we need to acknowledge that. And to really move forward with this topic, to really allow us to come up with long-term solutions and sustainable solutions to the problem, let us invest more on researchers and the scientists. Research is very expensive, and I think we have talents in this country to actually come up with our own scientific research programs that will be able to address the Filipinos' needs. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation. I hope I was able to give you some perspectives on how we can move forward with this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onda. We just ended the first part of our webinar. Kindly continue to post your questions in the Q&A box in this screen. So moving forward for the second part of our webinar, where a green and sustainable economic recovery cannot be single-handedly carried out by a single player. As such, to have a greater impact, a whole of society approach must be undertaken. At this point in time, it is imperative to have urban planning with green designs that are based on sustainability. To start our part two, our speaker has been evident that public sector alone cannot achieve a climate resilient and sustainable economy. The private sector should be part of the solution. With this, our speaker to the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation has been promoting a strategic partnership with companies, government agencies, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders that synergize and mobilize efforts towards building disaster resilient communities for Filipinos across the nation. Let us all welcome Mr. Rene Butch Mailey, President of the Philippine Disaster Resilient Foundation, who will share with us a topic on creating a resilient habitat for the entire Philippines.
Thanks, Ludwig. My most vivid memory growing up was Typhoon Yoling. And the reason I remembered it is it tore the roof off of our house. For every Filipino, we have a story, whether it's related to a typhoon, an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, or today's current pandemic. We live in a beautiful country, but it also has its dangers. Next slide, please. Much of the problem lies with a number of issues. And you can see here, I guess what is the point of this conference, that whether you look at one particular index or another, we're ranked number 4 in terms of climate risk in the left-hand index. And the most recent index on the right, we're ranked number 2 when you include economic effects of disasters, because it knocks so many people who are striving to be middle class. It knocks them back into poverty, and it hurts their efforts to send their next generation, their children, into school so they can escape that loop of poverty that really ensnares so much of our population. The problem also, we've got some caricatures here, is that we've had a consistent history of logging. Many families have made their fortunes on logging, which was legal for many years and then illegal later on. If you journey by air over much of the country, as I did yesterday to Cagayan and to Gugurao, you can see that many of our hillsides and our mountains are really denuded. So it's important for us to populate it with more trees, because trees hold the soil, they prevent flooding, they prevent landslides, they keep our environment healthy. So I think that's an important part of the strategy going forward. The other one of the other factors is that our population has been increasing. The rates have been lower lately, but if you look at the 1960s, we had a population of about 50 million people. Now we're up to about 109 billion people, and yet the land area that we have has not grown. Our resources remain the same, but our population has increased. In fact, due to rising sea levels because of climate change, our land level may be reduced, in fact, and rising sea levels are a particular threat to Metro Manila, which is a low-lying area in the first place and has suffered from flooding all the way back to the Spanish times. But as the sea level rises, it's going to be a issue for us going forward in our urban areas and in certainly in some of the beach resorts. Now, there's also been increased silting of our waterways. I saw that in the Cagayan River yesterday, and it's more difficult for the river to wend its way out of the Pacific Ocean because of silting. There needs to be more dredging. That was also true of Laguna Lake. I remember those issues from the Ondoy catastrophe in 2009, 2010. Next slide, please. Let's pivot to some of the solutions, at least as far as the one of the areas that is concerned today, the private sector. What we've tried to do at PDRF is first build up community resilience, because we need to make everybody aware of the risks to themselves, to their neighborhoods, to their friends, to their families of what's happening today. The increased threat of flooding, stronger storms. And so we have a whole program here, which is supported by a number of donors to increase the understanding of the people of what's at risk here. Now, next slide, please. What we've done is to build awareness from the ground up in our community resilience programs. It's not the top-down approach. The real understanding of what the threats are come from the people themselves. So that we've encouraged a program where they build 3D maps in these neighborhoods. They mark out the evacuation routes. They mark out the potential fire hazards and flood hazards. They do it themselves. And everybody is involved here in the barangay. So it makes a greater difference when they themselves map it out. You'll see a sample of the colored map there. And actually we have there's supposed to be a video on the right there, but I guess it's not working right now. But it shows you the communities that we're working with, doing the mapping for their particular neighborhoods themselves. Next slide, please. Oh, there, you can see some of the video. Now, aside from communities, we've also focused on building resilience of small businesses. There is a national initiative, including Department of Trade and Industry, PhilExport, Philippine Chamber of Commerce, and many other organizations. The whole idea is to increase the resilience of small businesses around the country through business continuity training. We've shifted to virtual training using our platform called iAdapt. But over the years, we've trained something from 7,000 to 9,000 small businesses around the country. And this continues to be one of our more popular programs that is supported actually by several companies, because they realize that no company stands alone by itself. It's dependent on its suppliers, its dealers, to sell its products, to market it. And so they're interested in building up the resilience, not just of the sari-sari stores and everyone else, but also of their own clients and who do business with them. Next slide, please. Now, we've also built a one-stop shop digital hub called CCAP, www.ccup.com.ph. It's completely free, and it gives tips for small businesses on how to get a loan, where to get a loan. It has online mentoring sessions that's all free. We started this as a result of the COVID pandemic. Many businesses, both small and large, are suffering, and quite a few have closed, never to reopen again. So we're facing that issue by helping put together this platform that's available to everyone. And we're encouraging small businesses everywhere to take advantage of these resources. You have nothing to lose, it's completely free. Next slide, please. Now we're also working with the government, which is a key sector really in this whole initiative. We're working with the Office of Civil Defense. We've developed the first ever public service continuity handbook. We realize that it's important for us that these government agencies are able to operate even during a crisis. And so we're working with them to try to implement the continuity principles that we use in business and apply those to government agencies. And we've worked with a number of agencies already, and with the help of the Office of Civil Defense, this effort is continuing. Next slide, please. Then we've turned to the organization's resilience and the resilience of our members and the different businesses that are affiliated with PDRF. You'll see here are two of our co-chairs, Manuel Panglinan, Jaime Augusto Isabel de Ayala, and Moncho Aboitis, who's a member of our board. In 2016, really thanks to the efforts of my colleague Bill Luz, who'll be speaking later, we built the world's first ever private sector run national emergency operations center. And we put it in Clark, so it's outside of the Metro Manila earthquake zone. It serves as a backup recovery site for our members, so that if anything happens to their operations, they can use it, they can relocate to Clark and continue to operate and serve the communities. Next slide, please. At this operations site in Clark, we're able to track typhoons anywhere in the world. We're able to track earthquakes all over. Anytime an earthquake happens above a certain magnitude anywhere in the world, a bell rings there and we can track it. We're able to track volcanic eruptions. And we're currently using the operations center, which is on red alert, both because of Super Typhoon Rolly and Typhoon Ulysses, but as well as the pandemic, we're tracking the pandemic as well, and we issue daily situation reports on the pandemic figures to our members and to our affiliates. Next slide, please. In the past, after Typhoon Ondoy flooded much of Metro Manila, that's when PDRF was first created in 2009, 2010. As a public-private sector partnership, because we realized we're stronger together, working together with all the different sectors. And the Marikina Watershed Rehabilitation was one of our most important projects, in which companies such as Jollibee, Coca-Cola, and many others sent their employees and donated funds to help reforest the watershed, which is very important to the Metro Manila area, because if that area is deforested, if it continues to lose the amount of forests there due to population pressure and cutting of the trees so that they can sell it for ashes for cooking, that watershed is going to continue to diminish, and the amount of flooding that comes down from those mountain areas will continue to flood the downstream communities. So this is a vital battle. It's been a difficult one, I have to admit, and just maintaining it over the years has been a struggle. So we'd welcome partnerships in this area, because we need to replant not just the Marikina watershed, but really many other areas in watersheds around the country. On the right, you'll see an initiative of Shell, in which we implemented a program of planting mangroves to protect our coastal cities. Much of what happened in Yolanda and in other typhoons, the effects of that are much more damaging, because the mangrove trees, which were originally there, had been replaced really and removed. And if we can build more mangroves, as I've seen in Palawan, where they have a very fertile mangrove plantations over there, where they even have a restaurant set in a mangrove area. If we can do that for our coastal cities, it will really help protect them. It will also provide livelihood for our fishermen, because it'll bring the fish back there, and it'll be good for everyone. Next slide, please. In addition, after Super Typhoon Yolanda, which is one of the really epic events of our lifetime, the PDRF, along with its many partners, has done its best to rebuild the structures in the provinces affected by Yolanda and to really build them stronger and better to withstand future calamities. This is an example of a health clinic that we rebuilt. Next slide, please. In addition, we've rebuilt schools across several provinces, Capiz, Antique, sorry, and other provinces affected with the help of our very generous donors and member companies. We've also rebuilt multi-purpose halls in relocation sites in Tacloban. Next slide, please. Our pride and joy are really the evacuation sites that we've built. 4 in the Tacloban Paclo area. We're building a 5th in that Al Volcano area because we realize these are standalone, world-class evacuation sites where you have it's self-contained. It's got generators, water tanks, ramps for the disabled, and lactation centers for breastfeeding mothers. Everything is there, and it's a safe haven for the community to run to. This is really a no-brainer for sites that are hit continuously by typhoons and other tragedies. Next slide, please. In addition, we've helped in terms of infrastructure by connecting, for example, the Pag-asa Doppler weather site in Bohol, providing connectivity to it so it can function. In Marawi, our member companies have produced a study of the water supply system there. We've turned it over to the government so it will help in the rebuilding of that city. On the left-hand slide, you'll see a spillway, a sign for a spillway, all the way from Laguna Lake to Manila Bay. This is an old plan, really from the 1970s, but the idea is that during peacetime, this will be a roadway, and during extreme flooding, it will become a spillway to rush the waters from the flooded areas down to Manila Bay. They've done this in Kuala Lumpur. It's a fantastic project. It's more difficult to implement now because of all the construction, which wasn't true in the 1970s. But it is the type of big project that will help alleviate our current situation in terms of flooding. Next slide, please. Now, with having said all of these, we continue to be hit, and will be hit in the future as well. By Super Typhoon Rolly, then we had the Typhoon Ulysses, who surprised a number of people with the amount of rain. This just shows you the damage from the overflow from the Cagayan River on the longest in the country. And the next slide, please. Now, I just wanted to end with this in terms of making the point of this conference that we really need the greatest form of resilience is when we work with and cooperate with each other, whether you're with the government, whether you're with the private sector, civil society, or international agencies. This was just has happened yesterday. These are private sector goods donated by the companies from PDRF. AirAsia flew us out there for free. We have the mayor of Tuguegarao there. We have the United Nations resident coordinator. We have the ambassadors from Germany and the Netherlands, and with the Office of Civil Defense warehouse there. It's just a great example of a whole of society approach in terms of working with the problems that we're facing. We've got a beautiful country, and it's really, we can't afford to fail in terms of making it a better and safer place for ourselves and our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neely. Thank you for sharing with us the tools and initiatives in strengthening community and business resilience. I just wanted to thank everyone at this point in time at 10:30 this morning. We still have 205 participants in this webinar. Let us continue to manage our time and as we move on the part 2 of our session. Our next speaker will discuss creating green and sustainable developments at present and in a post-COVID-19 economy. The COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized that our responses should be effective and efficient, anticipatory rather than reactionary. Our speaker, with his expertise in architecture to the Philippine Green Building Council, has been promoting international best practices on green and sustainable designs. Let us all welcome architect Joselito Luna, founder and principal of his own planning and design firm.
Good morning. Thank you, Ludwig, and thank you to StratBase for making me part of this forum. As mentioned, I'd like to discuss the topic about how cities can be made more sustainable and resilient against these crises that we are facing. The Philippines continues to be besieged by multiple calamities, from the Taal eruption at the start of the year to the successive super typhoons experienced recently. And we have passed our 8th month of quarantine as we struggle with the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis that it has brought about. There is no question that life has taken a dramatic change. And there is little doubt that many of these calamities are the consequences of human activity. The unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic has been referred to by the World Economic Forum as the Great Reset. It is an opportunity to revamp structures and discard elements that have made our society unequal and unsustainable. But perhaps even a reset is insufficient. Perhaps an upgrade or update is needed in the hardware and software that propels our society. It is said that the COVID-19 crisis revealed what was already broken in our system. The frailty of our economic system was exposed with the disruption of the cycle of production and consumption that kept society running. Modern capitalism is still largely premised on one-way linear system of resource extraction, production, consumption, and waste generation. And this is reflected in our cities. Cities, from its most fundamental economic perspective, are the concentration of surplus. Oceans, mountains, and hinterlands are the sources of food, water, energy, and resources needed to support life and the function of cities. The byproduct of production in cities, which come in the form of waste and pollution, are returned to nature and the hinterlands in this one-way relationship of extraction, production, consumption, and waste. This created much of the resource scarcity, overconsumptive lifestyle, and climate change that we face today. Consumerism causes resource extraction to happen at a pace that cannot be replenished by natural systems. The waste produced is beyond the capacity of natural sinks to assimilate. The impact of cities is significant. Cities occupy 1% of the world's land. They contain 60% of the world's population, and they generate 80% of the world's economic output. But they also consume 75% of global energy, and they emit 50 to 60% of greenhouse gases. Cities also generate over 2 billion tons of solid waste every year. Urbanization and the needs of its population puts pressure on the natural environment. Cities have emerged as centers of growing resource demand, and meeting this demand will become increasingly difficult given that the world will face a 40% shortfall of water, a 50% increase in food demand, and a 40% increase in electricity consumption by 2040. Many global challenges, though interconnected, have been addressed singly, and at times reducing one problem while exacerbating others. Nexus approaches simultaneously examine interactions among multiple sectors. Then we can see how the planning of cities for sustainability can be a system-wide approach to addressing this potential crisis. The opportunity lies in looking beyond sustainability. From a period of environmental degradation, we now need to look at means to restore and regenerate. Sustainability is no longer sufficient as a goal. Doing less harm is not enough. Regeneration has to be the objective. What is needed to reverse the trend is development that allows natural systems to be restored and to regenerate. To offset the negative effects of 100 years of industrialization, it is not enough to simply get to zero emissions or zero energy. We actually need to get past zero to generate negative carbon and generate positive impacts. This implies radical change, not just in the way we design our cities, but in our economic systems, consumptive lifestyles, corporate practices, and even our own very concept of wealth. As Bill Gates said, to save everything, we must change everything. Consumption will always be the foundation of capitalist economies, but the prevailing material consumerism can be corrected by shifting investments to prioritizing green technologies, human capital development, and environmental restoration. In the end, the only true bottom line is life. We can look at three critical elements to human survival that impact cities: food, energy, and water, or what the United Nations refer to as the nexus of sustainable development. For instance, if we look at water resources, extreme weather has brought our settlements to a paradoxical relationship with water. On one hand, we've been experiencing drought during the dry season, particularly during El Nino. During monsoon months, we experience devastating floods. Apart from that, water is probably our most wasted natural resource. Our built environment extracts fresh water from the ground or collects river water in dams. We use it for drinking, bathing, washing our clothes, and then discharge our wastewater into the same rivers that are also the source of our fresh water. In terms of energy, for instance, it is already common knowledge how our dependence on fossil fuels contribute to pollution and environmental damage. The issue is compounded by our increasing demand for energy. Cities and the built environment make up 73% of total global energy consumption. This energy goes into transportation systems, buildings, and manufacturing. And presently, energy from renewable resources comprise only 7% of total energy demand. Unless there is a major transition to renewable and non-polluting energy sources, the increase in energy demand brought about by intensified urbanization will further aggravate climate change. Food is another important aspect relating to sustainability. And food sustainability is not just about where our food comes from, but more about what we eat. Food consumption is responsible for 70% of the average global water footprint and 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. Soil depletion, water pollution, biodiversity are all impacted by the type of food that we eat. Particularly important is that as populations urbanize and become more affluent, there is an increase in meat consumption and livestock production, which puts a further strain on the environment. Worth noting is the total land area consumed by different human activities. Cities occupy 1% of total land area. Croplands take up 7%, but the area consumed by livestock, including the land used to feed livestock, consume 27% of land area, more than the area occupied by forests. This points to a profound behavioral and lifestyle trait that impacts human health and environment. What if we started to shift our paradigm towards restoring and regenerating, and in so doing, make our societies and cities more resilient? If 70% of total humanity will be living in cities by 2050, then we should transform our cities to higher levels of livability. What if we started planning communities for self-sufficiency by integrating agriculture and urban areas, thereby making cities producers and not just consumers? Creating agrihoods where food is the focus of communities is a possibility. Urban agriculture has proven to be an effective method of mitigating food scarcity, creating inclusive communities, generating livelihood, and improving urban biodiversity. It has been effective in places such as Sao Paulo or in Cuba, where vacant lands were used for organic farms, thus allowing the country to shift from 90% importation of food to being self-sufficient in fruits and vegetable production. Or even here in the Philippines, where communities took to urban agriculture in response to the pandemic lockdowns. When supply chains were disrupted and markets were closed, urban farms became the lifeline of many neighborhoods and even became a point of community empowerment and solidarity with the sharing of farming techniques, seeds, and produce. Our cities also need to adapt to changing climates. Sponge cities allow settlements to be more resilient against flooding by enabling the natural absorption, cleansing, and replenishment of groundwater. Or what if we can design cities that allow nature to regenerate by generating more energy than it consumes, by cleaning the air and water, by contributing to biodiversity, and by reintegrating outdoor areas and multiplying areas for vegetation. Effectively, our built environment should learn from the processes of the natural environment, where waste is upcycled and reused as raw materials, and where resources are not only conserved but also replenished, where food is produced locally. Economies and cities can function like forest ecosystems. Buildings, on the other hand, can mimic the function of trees, harnessing energy from the sun, cleansing wastewater, providing shade and comfort, collecting stormwater, and creating habitats. Estimates on our global footprint show that we have already exceeded the regenerative capacity of the planet by about 30%. This means that humanity is already in ecological overshoot. Either the human race will use its knowledge and skills and change the way it interacts with the environment, or the environment will change the way it interacts with its inhabitants. We need new ways of measuring productivity and a broader definition of prosperity. There is a need for capital to stop investing in destructive industries and instead invest in value-creating activities that restore natural resources, creating a truly green economy. And there is a need for cities of the future to be planned to integrate with nature rather than subdue it. Cities that are walkable, inclusive, resilient, and livable, creating truly green built environments. Thank you and good morning to all.
Thank you, Architect Luna. Our next speaker will present on the topic livable cities. Cities are the primary center for economic and industrial activities that contribute majority to the country's gross domestic product. However, they also become centers for pressing climate and natural disaster issues. Our speaker, through the PDRF, or Philippine Disaster Relief Foundation, has been underscoring that if these impacts are to be minimized, our cities need to change the existing reactive approach to a more participatory approach. Let us all welcome Mr. Guillermo Bill Cruz, Chief Resilient Officer of the Philippine Disaster Resilient Foundation and Associate Director of the Ayala Corporation.
Good morning, and thank you, Ludwig, for the introduction. Thank you to Dean Dumanhit and Strat-based ADR Institute for inviting me today to speak. And uh, thank you in particular for placing me right after architect Joa Luna's great presentation, because it's really all about building livable cities. And let me start by maybe give you the underlying philosophy behind uh, our project. Let me just see if I can get the slides moving here. Wait, sorry, let me try that again. Okay. The underlying philosophy behind this is that we needed to build local competitiveness because we saw this as critical to enhancing long-term national competitiveness. It's kind of a building block approach to a country by focusing first at the ground level or at local communities. And the reasons, I think, as already stated by some of the previous speakers, is that urban populations have been growing. And just to illustrate, in Asia Pacific, it's risen from 33 to 43% in the last 2 decades. And in East Asia, over 50% of the population already live in cities. And Asia is home to more than half of the world's megacities, which includes, of course, Metro Manila as one of the 30 or so cities in the world listed as classified as a mega city. And by 2050, up to 75% of the world's population will live in urban areas versus only a third in the 50s. So there's been a great trend towards urbanization. And as already mentioned, uh, cities are growth engines in terms of consumption, population, resource use, but also waste. And 11 of the 20 most polluted cities are in Asia, and 15 of 20 cities most exposed to rising sea levels from climate change are also in Asia. And in the Philippines, just think of many of our cities as being coastal cities, and we have relatively fewer inland cities. And cities are the growth drivers. And when you think about it, when people sort of think about where they live, work, invest, and visit, at the back of their minds, they're really thinking of a city, not an entire country. Even if they say they're going to visit a country, typically they're thinking of visiting a specific city or set of cities. My slides seem to be freezing. Sorry, let me try this again. If you don't mind, I'll stick to this format because it'll be faster. So as pointed out already by Joel, cities account for large amounts of GDP, of course, population, but also global greenhouse gases. And they're high in productivity, but also high in waste. No, and why do we need livable cities in the Philippines? Essentially, we look at cities as the primary drivers of economic growth and innovation. Not the only drivers, but they take a larger weight than the rest of the country. They're hubs, as I said, of consumption, resource use, and waste, but they're also the generators of wealth, production, and development. So think of cities as economic engines. And for the Philippines, we have 146 cities and about 1,500 municipalities. So the cities are the larger ones, and the towns and municipalities are from class one to class six, and so some are very small. But what are the benefits of creating a livable city? One is you have a diversification of investment and job opportunities. Second, you have the potential to create some new wealth. You can grow a middle class in different parts of the country rather than few parts of the country. And you create an overall attractiveness of the country as an investment site because now you have more opportunities to invest in different parts of the country. So in a way, it's kind of an inclusive growth piece as far as national development is concerned. If we had so development in so few cities, we are not able to spread out and diversify that growth as much as we had more cities. So our vision has been to accelerate this trend towards designing, building, and redeveloping cities which are competitive, sustainable, and resilient. And that's how we initially defined some elements of livability. By all means, not all the elements, but at least some of the more important ones we had to think of. And I think for the Philippines, uh, historically we always focused on so few, three urban centers, basically Manila, Cebu, Davao. But in reality, we need to think of 30, maybe even 40 cities scattered across the country if we were to diversify growth opportunities and build more balanced growth across the country. And cities kind of go through an evolution. And if you take a look at where we are across this spectrum, are we, in survival mode as a city, basic, advanced, or do we have a good quality of life? Or are we, the reality is, I think, for the Philippines, in some cities, we have pockets of each. Even Metro Manila, for example, you can see areas which are, you know, definitely in survival mode, and other areas which are the opposite end of the spectrum, where, you have all the amenities and a pretty good quality of life like you would find in a developed country. The other thing we took a look at in terms of livability is because among the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, actually sustainable cities and communities are there on their own as number 11 of the 17. So it's obviously seen as an important element from an SDG point of view. And it's been calculated that you can't really achieve too much in the national SDG if you don't have cities involved somehow as an actor or a player in meeting the other SDG goals. So it's calculated that maybe as much of 65%, two-thirds of the SDG agenda for a country would not be achieved if we did not involve cities helping out. So, what are the types of problems? When we originally looked and designed the Livable Cities project, we spotted some easily four initial challenges uh, after talking and surveying mayors a couple of years ago. So one is basic infrastructure. Many cities still lack the complete infrastructure that they feel they need to have. The second is a resilience challenge, and we've seen this firsthand in the last few weeks. We had four storms in the last 3 weeks, and they have hit across uh, pretty well half the country from Bicol up to northern Luzon in Cagayan Valley area. Uh, and they've caused massive amounts of damage. People talk about Raleigh and Ulysses, but Quinta also inflicted some damage as well. And you can see how unprepared we are, even for something that's quite expected and is a regular occurring event every year. We have 25 storms a year, so should come as no surprise. But still, we were caught unprepared. We have a mobility challenge, especially in bigger cities, not only Metro Manila, but in other large cities, we have mobility challenges and traffic. And mobility here is not only the ability to move people, but the ability to move uh, cargo, the ability to move merchandise. It's not only within the city, but from city to city and across the archipelago. And just to kind of illustrate how important this would be uh, from a logistics point of view, there's been a lot of talk lately about vaccines. But just think about the logistics of moving those vaccines around at cold storage, cold supply chain, uh, some of it reaching down into negative 70, 80 degrees Celsius across the country and getting it distributed efficiently. That's a mobility and a logistics challenge of a very different type, but illustrates the difficulties we're facing. We also have a GovTech challenge. On the left, this is an experience many of us go through, lining up in government offices, or sending our messengers to line up in government offices and fill out papers, by hand, when in fact technology should allow us to move into use much more new technology and apps and software, whether on laptops or phones. And finally, what COVID has brought about is an education challenge as we move from face to online education, and a public health challenge with COVID. So these are some of the new challenges we face. And because businesses have been shut down, there's even an e-commerce challenge where people have to go into digital transactions, but have to face a mobility challenge to be able to deliver their goods. So these are some of the challenges facing our own cities. But just be aware that cities are traditionally measured around the world, not just you know Mercer, for instance, is one of the most famous of city ranking um, indices, and it's used by businesses to find out where they want to place their people and their offices, and these are the areas that they measure. Economist also measures a global livability index among cities, ranking 140 cities based on things like stability, healthcare, culture and environment, education, and infrastructure. Again, it helps businesses decide where they want to place people. So we created this project called Livable Cities Challenge. And this is kind of the program that we developed post COVID, because pre COVID, we had a different design. We had to change the design and obviously go much more digital in our work for the Livable Cities Challenge. So we put the summit on hold, but we're proceeding with other things like Livable Cities Labs, local labs, website redevelopment, so on and so forth. Uh, we started uh, with the digital exchange, knowledge exchange, using what they call labs. And these are webinars that have attracted as many as 400 people twice a month. We've done 8, and now we are moving to our 9. So these are just some of the topics that we've completed. And one of our most popular was the one on resilience, uh, just because it's so important for all cities to think about the resilience from natural calamities. And tomorrow we're actually going on with the 9th lab of the year on creating intelligent cities. Then we'll take a break and continue our program next year. The other thing we've done is created a livable cities dashboard because we wanted our cities to become much more data centric and data driven. So data, even for resilience, even for environmental issues, data is so important, uh, not only for the research, but for the planning and the implementation side. So we felt that this plays an important role in policy and investment decisions. We wanted to consolidate multiple data sources and visually display them. And we wanted local governments and businesses to spot trends quickly. So we want our goal here is create data driven cities. And the core principle is what gets measured gets managed. And if you have data at a glance, you'll be able to see whether you are improving or not improving over time. Our coverage here, 146 cities. We're not able to do municipalities because we don't have the resources to do that. But who finds a dashboard useful? Public sector, of course, city governments, businesses to guide them to decide where to locate, and citizens to decide how to engage. So, just an example of what we have. This is our version 1 of our uh, dashboard, and you're able to get in basic information about each of the 146 cities across 10 different buckets of information. And now you can compare cities across these 10 areas, and you can compare them 3 at a time, for instance, for things like population and workers and education and health and so on and so forth. And then you can sort of rank cities by top 10 or bottom 10, as the case may be. And we're able to track that as well as give specific city profiles. We're adding new content in version 2, which includes risks and hazards. So we're trying to build in much more resilience type of indicators in here. We want to track more vulnerable populations, poverty incidents, people with disabilities, Those are important. And we want to incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals into each city dashboard. So we've added new features, greater time series, and one of the ones I want to feature is just mobility. So we put things like P2P routes when they get going again. We'll have a route system. We'll have a public transport system, which is provided to us by Sakai.ph. And we're looking at bicycle lanes because we think that's the trend these days for walkability and cyclability within cities and across cities. So all this would not be possible without partners who've joined us in this journey to create livable cities. We continue to add partners because we think this is going to be a long journey, but we hope with more partners we will be able to achieve this vision of creating more livable cities in the Philippines. Thank you very much.
What get measured gets managed. That would be one of my tweets for today. Thank you very much, Mr. Luz. Our next speaker will talk about on the topic working towards circularity and climate action. Amid the ongoing waste problem, Coca-Cola Philippines remains committed to turn the tide by spearheading Coca-Cola Philippines sustainability initiatives such as World Without Waste and water replenishment programs. Our speaker leads in affirming the company's commitments to the Philippines. Let us all welcome Ms. Joanna De Lumen Pernia, Public Affairs and Sustainability Director, Coca-Cola Philippines.
Thank you, Ludwig, and good morning, everyone. It's good to see the public and private sector come towards a common goal towards green economic recovery and climate action. I myself have learned so much in the past hour or so that we've been together. Now, just listening to everything, I've seen a consistent thread so far. That is that the environment and economy need to go hand in hand and need to thrive together, especially in the midst of a crisis. As part of the private sector, I've been getting a lot of questions that revolve around this. Will companies uphold their sustainability commitments amidst business challenges on fundamental things such as cash flow? At Coca-Cola, we believe that sustainability initiatives cannot be a nice to have, and it cannot be just about philanthropy. We cannot slow down just because there is a crisis. You know, a crisis actually magnifies the environmental issues even more. And we've seen that with the effects of the recent typhoons. Thus, we work towards integrating our sustainability goals into the business to ensure that as our company grows or contracts, the environment is protected and the environment continues to flourish. So allow me to share some highlights on the three parts that you're seeing on the screen now, how we remain committed to climate action and committed to reduce total carbon emission across our value chain. Today, in the interest of time, I will share some highlights on three focus areas, and that would be water, plastic waste, and energy. First is about water. With this pandemic, access to water has become even more important given its role in hygiene and sanitation. Water replenishment has been a core focus for Coca-Cola for over 13 years here in the Philippines. And to date, we have given back 112% of the water we use to make our products. This means we return every single drop of water and more to the environment and the community through water access and watershed protection projects, such as our project with WWF on the Ipo watershed. We could have easily just done the same initiatives this year, but instead, we refocus our initiatives to the imminent needs post-pandemic. We decided to move our water access programs from rural areas to urban high-risk areas post-COVID. We shifted our programs from ramp pump systems to community-led water distribution systems. We have also donated 125 hand washing stations to schools and local government units. As you can see, we did not need to slow down or deprioritize. These programs are still true to our company focus, but we adapted to what the people needed at this time. The second case I wanted to share is on the topic of plastic waste, which Professor Dio put at the context on. Similar to our goal towards water neutrality, we also have a goal towards packaging neutrality. We have set a goal of collecting and recycling every single bottle we sell by 2030. Yes, we want every bottle back because they should not end up in the wrong places like landfills and oceans. Thankfully, these plastic or PET bottles have value and can be recycled to furniture, shirts, and even back to bottles again. This is the value we see, and that is why Coca-Cola has invested in a 1 billion bottle-to-bottle recycling facility, which should be operational by end of 2021. This will be the only one here in the country, and this means we will be collecting used plastic bottles and recycling them to food-grade bottles again, a true circular economy. And amidst the setbacks of this crisis, we are still forging ahead on this initiative as this is a critical piece to meeting our 100% collection and recycling goal. And the last one and the third pillar on the screen is on the topic of energy. We've seen 73% of uh, global warming is through energy. And so Coca-Cola is proud to share that 65% of our energy consumption is being sourced from renewable energy. 7 out of our 19 manufacturing sites all over the Philippines already use geothermal energy, and 3 more sites will begin using solar energy. In addition, we have used 30% less energy through energy saving initiatives. And it really just goes to show that we as companies can grow while having less impact on the environment. So circling back to my question earlier on sustainability taking a backseat during a crisis, the answer is a clear no. Sustainability initiatives need to be accelerated, redoubled, and given focus, especially during a crisis. The ongoing debate has just been about health versus economy, lives versus livelihood. But given the depth of our discussion today, it is clear that it cannot be just those two levers. It needs to be about health, economy, and environment, and all are interrelated. As they say, there is no planet B, and it cannot just be about lives and livelihood. It also needs to be about the life of the planet. Coca-Cola is fully supportive towards climate action and towards a green recovery. And with that, thank you so much, Dindo and the ADR Institute for this opportunity to participate. And in the spirit of a whole of society approach, I look forward to connecting with any of you who are interested on possible partnerships. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pernia. Thank you for the work being undertaken by Coca-Cola Philippines. Moving on another topic, which our new speaker will talk about on green buildings. There is a need to promote the sharing of knowledge and international best practices in integrating green and climate resilient designs. Our speaker, through the Philippine Green Building Council, has been campaigning for the transformation of design, construction, and management methods of the industry into the practices that are environmentally and socially responsible, safe and healthy, and a prosperous environment that improves the quality of life. Let us all welcome Mr. Raymond Rufino, Treasurer of the Philippine Green Building Council.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you to Dindo and Stratbase for having the Philippine Green Building Council present today. So today I'm going to speak about green buildings, one of the greatest weapons we have in the fight against the current climate crisis. Can we move to the next slide, please? So green buildings refer to conceptualizing, planning, designing, constructing, and operating projects in the most resource-efficient manner with the least negative environmental impact. Green buildings can create powerful positive impact to our quality of life, our communities, our climate, and our natural environment. Next slide, please. This is clearly evident in the Global Sustainable Development Goals that green buildings are addressing. SDG 3 on good health and well-being is now critical as we combat the current pandemic. Very often we think of green as only being good for the environment. Let's not forget being green is also good for people. The evidence is clear that green buildings promote the health, well-being, and productivity of those who live, work, and play in them. And with impact ranging from affordable and clean energy to life on land, green buildings has to be the way forward for our real estate sector. Next slide, please. Globally, the World Green Building Council, or World GBC network, leads the transformation of the built environment to make it healthier and more sustainable. The World GBC creates and promotes global programs while supporting the local efforts of each country member in pushing green building. Next slide, please. Collectively, the National Green Building Councils, or GBCs, from over 70 countries drive action to achieve these global goals and promote sustainable development. Each national GBC has been transforming their markets across different sectors towards a more sustainable built environment. The Philippine Green Building Council, or PhilGBC, is proud to be an established member of the World GBC. Next slide, please. One of the most notable programs of each national GBC is the promotion or development of green building rating tools. Green building rating tools or certification have been used to assess and recognize buildings which meet green requirements or standards. Rating tools vary in their approach and priorities with respect to environmental, social, and economic sustainability. In addition, these tools may be applied to the different building phases, from conceptualization to demolition or deconstruction, and in different scales, from products to communities to cities. Next slide, please. The Philippine Green Building Council, or PhilGBC, is a multi-sectoral alliance of industry companies and professionals leading the green and sustainable transformation of our local built environment. It is not an easy task, but we are working hard with our members and partners to do what we can before it is too late. Next slide, please. For the Philippines, the building industry in 2007 decided that it needed its own rating system to ensure that we address our local priorities and achieve alignment with national and local policies and business practice. The PhilGBC developed the BERDE Green Building Rating System based on current best practices and technologies, changes in regulatory requirements, improvements in industry standards, and the experience and insight gained in the use of BERDE in green building projects. So BERDE stands for Building for Ecologically Responsive Design Excellence. Next slide, please. We believe that projects should have a holistic view of environmental, social, and economic priorities when designing, constructing, and operating their green building projects. BERDE has a holistic approach to green building, guided by its core framework, as you can see on this slide. The categories under the core framework define the credits and requirements that are essential in developing a green building project. This core framework includes the following: management, use of land and ecology, energy efficiency and conservation, water efficiency and conservation, waste management, green materials, transportation, indoor environmental quality, and emissions. On the other hand, electives are optional credits that may provide wider sustainability benefits for projects, which are not necessarily part of the core framework. These additional credits are maintained under the credit library. So it's not easy to get your project BERDE certified. As you can see here, it is a very robust and comprehensive rating tool. And any green building project to get certified must meet all of these core framework requirements. Next slide, please. And while it is difficult, we really encourage everyone to get your projects BERDE certified, because this is the only way we can prove to the market and to all other parties. We do not advocate for making green claims on your projects if you cannot substantiate those claims. We need to be able to prove to people that these buildings and these projects are truly green. So whether you're undergoing planning, design, construction, or operations, please use the latest version of BERDE. You can register your project, complete the certification process, and get your project BERDE certified. Take that step and join us in the fight against the climate crisis by greening our buildings. For more information, we have a website. You can visit berdeonline.org. The rating tool is actually available for free download in case anyone wants to just read through it. There is no cost to read or consult the framework or the rating tool in your projects. If you would like to register or if you want assistance on your project or have questions, please feel free to reach out to Mr. Chester De La Cruz through the email here at verde@philgbc.org. Next slide, please. The PhilGBC also recently launched the Advancing Net Zero Philippines program. The program will focus on reducing resource consumption and emissions and shifting towards more sustainable sources to achieve project impact neutrality and provide positive benefits. One of the things we believe is that it's not only just green buildings we need to talk about today, but we really need to push the envelope and try to achieve net zero. This is the only way we can control the rising temperatures and really be able to beat the ever rising global temperatures that we are seeing year on year. Next slide, please. Under the pilot edition of the Advancing Net Zero Philippine project, we are launching the Net Zero Energy Rating Scheme. What is net zero energy? Net zero energy is the conservation and optimization of energy use while using renewable energy to address the remaining operational energy demand in a project. Next slide, please. So let me break this down. Next slide. Go ahead. Okay. So let me break this down so that it's easier for everyone to understand. So how do you achieve net zero energy performance? First step is we need to limit the use of any energy. We need to prioritize strategies that keep the energy demand at a minimum through passive design strategies. It is important that our project design takes advantage of the local climate and site conditions to reduce the building cooling load, maximize natural ventilation, and ensure daylighting. Second, we need to optimize any energy that has to be used. Energy efficiency ensures that energy is not wasted and is used efficiently to maintain comfort levels and productivity. We can further improve energy performance and reduce energy demand by using active energy efficiency technologies. And third, we should use renewable energy to address the remaining operational energy demand of the project, whether by generating on-site RE or by purchasing off-site RE from retail suppliers. Projects may achieve nearly net zero by ensuring the production of on-site RE that may meet the reduced energy demand of a project, or even reach net zero energy through the combination of both on-site and off-site renewable energy sources. The guidance for net zero energy will be published to the website anzph.org. And with this framework, projects may have their projects certified using the Net Zero Energy Rating Scheme under the Net Zero certification process. So in the Philippines, I'm not sure if many of you are aware, but you now have the possibility to secure your power through renewable sources. If you are a contestable customer, you can now take advantage of the law, the open access law that allows you to select your power producer and your power provider. And you can now choose a green renewable energy provider versus a non-green or non-renewable provider. So it's a very exciting development in our energy market. Next slide, please. We are currently under pilot implementation of the Net Zero Energy Certification Rating Tool. And for more information on this, you may contact Mr. Mario Swelto through email at anzph@philgbc.org. So we're very excited to be launching this pilot program with our pilot partners and some pilot projects. And the hope is by 2021, first quarter of next year, we will now be able to start actual certification and registrations for net zero energy buildings. Next slide, please. The PhilGBC also recently launched the Green Building Procurement Hub, an online portal for your procurement needs for products and services for your green building projects. This is to help project proponents easily search for the technologies and strategies they need to achieve their green building goals. This has been a long time project and aspiration for the council. It took us many years to get this started, but we're so happy to announce that finally we have been able to get this project going as a one-stop resource for green building products, services, and projects. So I do hope many of you can find the time to please visit this website, as mentioned earlier, at greenbuildingph.org. If you would like more information about this this procurement hub, feel free to reach out to Ms. Rowena Elida at greenbuildingph@philgbc.org. Next slide, please. So please join our advocacy for green buildings in the following ways. So one, you can engage your local government officials and inspire them to incorporate green building principles in your local policies. If you are a government official or staff, lead the discussions in your office and encourage more sustainable governance in your jurisdiction. If you are a private sector company, speak with your local representatives and inspire them to push for policies and programs that encourage better building performance. The government, especially the local government, has such a powerful role to play in greening our buildings and our real estate sector. Number two, actively participating in national and local discussions on green buildings and sustainability programs. Your participation in these discussions will help shape a more responsive and sustainable program. Number three, sharing your project data and case studies. Building and investment data is necessary in creating appropriate and responsive policies. By sharing your building data, policymakers can effectively identify the appropriate levels of performance for the program. And lastly, joining the PhilGBC and our programs and activities, which includes the legislative coordination and consultation at both the local and national levels where the PhilGBC represents the real estate industry. Please contact the PhilGBC National Secretariat to legislative@philgbc.org, and you may look for Ms. Sarah Alpalpara. Next slide, please. We're seeing an increasing number of green building projects in the country, an increasing number of professionals that are getting involved in green building projects. For more information about BERDE, you may contact the BERDE Program Secretariat by sending an email to cbp@philgbc.org and look for Ms. Rowena Elida. If you're interested in trainings and capacity building activities, please visit our website and social media accounts for future events of the Council. For registrations for the BERDE Professional Training Course, you can send an email to berde@philgbc.org and look for Mr. Chester De La Cruz. Last slide. So on a final note, it's not too late for us to turn the tide on the climate crisis, but it will require our collective commitment and your personal action. Every single one of us can be a green building champion for our communities, our cities, and our country. Thank you, and good morning to everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rufino. Moving on with our next speaker, who will discuss with us towards sustainable mining. Mineral resources present in the Philippines are necessary for the manufacturing of digital communication infrastructure and hospital and healthcare technologies and equipment. Our next speaker, through the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines towards Sustainable Mining Initiative, aims for the industry to undertake its huge potential to uplift the lifestyle, reduce poverty, and contribute to the socio-economic development of the country. Let us all welcome Mr. Rocky Di Maculangan, Vice President for Communications and National Coordinator for Towards Sustainable Mining, Chamber of Mines of the Philippines.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here in behalf of the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines, composed of the country's biggest metallic, mining, and exploration companies. I'm happy to share with you our journey towards sustainable mining. We in the mining industry want to get it right. The Towards Sustainable Mining Initiative will help us achieve that. TSM is the commitment of all the members of the Chamber to demonstrate performance to our critical stakeholders on an annual basis. It is important for our members to go beyond the word of the law and say that leadership is an important part of the way we operate. Next slide, please. Our journey actually began 2 years before we signed up for TSM. In 2015, still under the previous administration, all large-scale mining companies were required to obtain ISO 14001 certification. We were all able to achieve that. Next slide, please. In 2016, shortly after he assumed office, President Duterte said he doesn't mind mining as it can contribute to the country's economic growth, so long as it follows stringent global standards, particularly that of Canada and Australia, as you know, two of the leading mining jurisdictions in the world. Next slide, please. In one of our member firms, Felix Mining Corporation, a part of the MVP Group, came across TSM in 2017 and recommended its adoption by the Chamber of Mines. The Chamber saw the beauty in TSM and reached out to the Mining Association of Canada later that year. What's so beautiful about TSM, you may ask? Next slide, please. TSM is a set of measurement tools and indicators to drive environmental and social performance and ensure that key mining risks are managed responsibly at members' facilities. As Mr. Bilus mentioned earlier, what gets measured gets managed. Next, the program was established in 2004 by the Mining Association of Canada, and its main objective is to enable mining companies to meet society's needs for minerals, metals, and energy products in the most socially, economically, and environmentally responsible way. TSM's core strengths lie in the fact that it is performance-driven, it fosters accountability, it promotes transparency, and it possesses credibility. With a 15-year track record as a reliable environment and social governance standard under the guidance of a multi-sector community of interest advisory panel, which I will discuss in detail shortly. Canada's partner countries in TSM are Argentina, Botswana, Finland, the Philippines, Spain, and the latest one just this year, Brazil. Other countries that have expressed interest in TSM are South Africa, Indonesia, Peru, Chile, Laos, and Australia. The Philippines is the first in Asia and the only country in the continent that has adopted TSM. Next slide, please. One of the things that TSM does is lay out a set of expectations that everyone will be judged against a higher level of standards. These expectations come in the form of tools to manage risks, measure results, and foster progress in two key areas: communities and people. These protocols are about working with people and communities in providing sustainable as well as safe and healthy working environments, and environmental stewardship. These protocols provide further guidance on minimizing our environmental impact. Next slide, please. We adapted from MAC, previous piece. We adopted from MAC 7 of their 8 performance areas or protocols, which addresses some of the critical risks or key areas or key issues that mining companies need to care about. As you can see in the slide, these protocols are safety and health, community and IP engagement, crisis management and communications, child and forced labor, where we will also involve our suppliers, environmental stewardship, tailings management, water management, and biodiversity conservation management. Next slide, please. During the Filipinization of these protocols, it was recommended by the Tailings Management Review Team to defer the implementation of the protocol in the light of the tailings dam accident in Brazil last year. In response to that accident, the International Council on Mining and Metals recently announced a new global standard on tailings management. We are working closely with the MAC and other partner countries in aligning TSM with the global tailings standard. Next slide, please. These 5 protocols are assessed on a 5-point scale: C, B, A, AA, and AAA, with AAA representing leadership and best practices, and A representing good practices. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, under these 2 protocols, a mining project could only pass or fail. Either the project achieves the indicators and criteria under these protocols, or they do not. Next slide, please. Now let me discuss the regular cycle of the TSM layers of verification, which follows a 3-year cycle. Every year, chamber member companies will ask each of their mining projects to self-assess against a set of protocols or measuring sticks. And so these mining projects will grade themselves, and then they submit the information to the chamber. Chamber publishes the reports so that all of the reports from the mining projects are publicly available. Next slide, please. Every 3 years, To validate or calibrate the self-assessment, a company will undergo external verification where you have qualified verifiers come on site and double check or validate the self-assessments. Next slide. In the year when a member company or a chamber member company undergoes external verification, the CEO or an authorized officer of the company will provide a letter of assurance confirming that the verification was conducted. Next slide. And then for companies that were verified in a particular year, a subset is invited by the Community of Interest Advisory Panel to come before them and to discuss their TSM results and respond to a series of questions. In the experience of the members of the Mining Association of Canada, this has proven to be tremendously valuable to them because they get to really engage and find out what issues are of concern and interest to the advisory panel and the backgrounds they bring to the table. The COI panel is an independent multi-stakeholder group comprised of 15 individuals from sectors such as labor, environment, civil society, academe, finance, law, indigenous peoples, and church, among others. Select members of the Chamber Board also sit on the panel to provide mining industry perspective to discussions. I will introduce you to the members of the COI panel in a bit. Next slide. Next slide, please. Considering the already strict regulatory environment and at least 8 memorandum and Department of Administrative Orders and other impositions such as the ISO certification and the Mines and Geosciences Bureau scorecard, it is understandable for our members to ask, what's in it for me? Or the WIFM question, or more appropriately, what's in it for mining? According to the Canadian ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Peter MacArthur, TSM has over the last 15 years helped to transform how mines in Canada manage the environmental and social aspects of their operations. For example, in areas related to how mines work with local and indigenous communities, when TSM undertook its first third-party verifications in 2006, only about 50% could meet or exceed the good practice level of performance or level A. Today, over 90% of mines using TSM have met or exceeded the minimal required level. Next slide, please. Investors are increasingly looking at how to measure the environmental and social performance of miners and are turning to standards like TSM. In fact, Sustainalytics, a major environmental and social ratings agency, recently developed a new tailings indicator that leans heavily on TSM. The only way a miner can receive the top level of performance in the Sustainalytics indicator is through TSM. Next slide, please. And so on December 19, 2017, we signed a mutual cooperation licensing agreement with the Mining Association of Canada to adopt TSM. You can see in this photo, it was attended by the Canadian ambassador and the DNR Secretary, Roy Simatu. Also in this picture are heads of our member companies. Next slide, please. We've gone a long way since we signed up for TSM in late 2017. I don't want to bore you with the details of our progress, but I'd like you to note the red letter dates in this slide and the next slide, please. These dates have to do with the long TSM Filipinization process, making sure that TSM and its components are responsive to conditions in these islands. We will take a close look at this Filipinization process in a bit. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. One of the highlights of our progress was the first meeting and orientation of our Community of Interest Advisory Panel. And now I'll introduce you to our members. Next slide, please. As you can see here, the academe is represented by the Dean of the Ateneo School of Government, Professor Ronald Mendoza. From the NGO, Civil Society, Michelle Omagno. Environment, Professor Carlos Primo David of the UP NIGS. From the religious sector, Father Jerome Marquez. He's the Provincial Superior of the Society of the Divine Word. Next slide, please. Ms. Lucy Cruz Valdez, representing the media. She's the head of news and information of TV5. Mr. Attorney Gerard Seno, he's a top official of the Trade Union Congress of the Philippines. Former Director of the Mines and Geoscience Bureau and former Assistant Secretary to DNR, Mr. Edwin Domingo. For the legal sector, we have Attorney Jose Milla. Next slide, please. Again, for the environment and forestry sector, Ms. Lizelle Liton Releta, she's the Vice President and Project Director of Gaia South. For finance, we have a partner of the SGV, Mr. Alexis Benjamin Zaragoza. Local government, the Governor Alfrancis Bichara. And for the indigenous peoples, Mr. Rogelio Bantayan, he's the Executive Director of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. Next slide, please. The three chamber directors sit in the COI panel as ex-officio members. Mr. Gerard Brimo, the chairman of the Chamber of Mines and chairman of Nickel Asia Corporation. Mr. Jules Austin, he's the president of Felix Mining Corporation. And Ms. Gloria Tan Climaco, she's the chairperson of Philminera Resources. Next slide, please. We had envisioned a three-step Philippinization process. We started the preliminary revisions in 2018. Next slide, please. And these are the review leaders, composed of officials and functional experts from these 7 mining companies, each tasked to review the 7 protocols. Next slide, please. Then we expanded the setup in May 2019 to include, next slide, please, more companies. As you can see, the lead companies are still the 7 companies mentioned earlier, plus more. Next slide, please. Then we conducted a workshop in August 2019, last year. Next slide, please. And it was participated in by 60 company representatives, or what we call TSM initiative leaders, who will implement TSM in their respective companies. We categorize further the protocols into 3 for ease of implementation. Next slide. We felt that after the workshop, we had to do another review to address, among others, some of the issues raised during the workshop, including the impact of the newly released then Mines and Geoscience Bureau scorecard on TSM. Thank you. The next slide, please. Now you will see here the highlights of the revisions we did on the protocols. This include, of course, the application of Philippine terms. They don't use stakeholders in Canada. They use facility level community of interest. They use the terms Aborigines and First Nations. We call them indigenous peoples. And one of the major revisions is the inclusion of the social development and management program. You know, the Philippine large-scale mining industry is the only industry that is required to set aside a portion of their operating margins to social development. Now, this is mandated by law. So we had to include this in the TSM. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, confident that we are already set with the revisions we made, we presented the Philippinized protocols to the Community of Interest Advisory Panel just a month shortly before the COVID-19 lockdown. Next slide, please. However, there was still some comments from the COI panel, and among them is that we must include outcomes as part of the TSM criteria. They say that Canada model is too process-oriented. We consulted the MAC on this, and they pointed out that outcomes or outputs are not something that can be compared between mines and between companies. How much tailings or water the mine discharges, or how many community projects or agreements are in place varies from mine to mine, and the context around the local situation are critical in understanding whether those outputs are appropriate or not. What is comparable and easy to subject to a benchmark such as TSM is whether the process meets certain established levels of quality, so that it is where the focus is. Many of our standards, however, have reporting or performance indicators associated with them that require the mines to establish objectives and targets and undertake public reporting. This is included to ensure that there are outcomes or outputs associated with each protocol. For example, in biodiversity, one of the indicators instructs the site to establish targets and or objectives for significant aspects of biodiversity. And then another indicator asks the mine to publicly report on biodiversity performance. Nevertheless, our TSM review leaders focused on 3 protocols and revised further 3 of the protocols, as you can see on the slide. We've submitted these revisions to the COI panel, and it seems they're happy with it. Next slide, please. Now, despite the pandemic, we were able to roll out the TSM to our members in Mindanao and Luzon, Visayas in August and September, respectively. And the messages of support were expressed by the Canadian Ambassador Peter MacArthur, the DNR Assistant Secretary Nitz Kagiwa, the Mines and Geosciences Director Mr. Wilfredo Moncano, and 14 MGB regional directors. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. A total of over 200 representatives from chamber member firms participated in the rollouts. Next slide, please. So what's the next step? As you know, we deferred the tailings management protocol, and we are continuously aligning it with the global tailings standard. And we hope to be able to do this in March next year. Next slide, please. In the next 4 years, from 2021 to 2024, we will implement a slightly modified verification system. This modified system considers the limitations presented by the ongoing pandemic and ensures a smooth transition to the regular TSM cycle that I discussed earlier. We hope to find our independent external verifiers next year and have them approved by the COI panel in 2022 and see the completion of their training also that year. The publication of verification results will be made in 2023 and 2024 when external verification of assessment results will have been completed among all our members. Last slide, please. During Mining Philippines last year, we didn't have one this year because of the pandemic. Our chairman, Mr. Gerard Brimo, mentioned this. Now, our reputation as an industry has suffered tremendously by the attacks that we've gone through in the fairly recent past. But it will take some time and a concerted effort of the industry to prove that it operates responsibly and that communicates its accomplishments. To my mind, that means not just mere compliance, but going beyond. Let us prove to all and sundry that this is a resilient industry that won't go away, that we indeed operate responsibly and go beyond mere compliance. We live in a world of much heightened environmental concerns, knowledge awareness, heightened levels of citizens' engagement. People care about issues and they expect more from mining companies. This is our way of demonstrating that and that we are committed to acting responsibly. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Dimakulangan. In terms of developing a climate resilient and sustainable city, Manila City has welcomed innovation and international best practices in its planning and implementation by collaborating with local city stakeholders. To share more about this, allow me to introduce to you our last speaker for today, Honorable Francisco Isco Moreno Dumagoso, Mayor of the City of Manila.
Hi, thank you, Ludwig. Teka muna, ito si Vice Mayor. Gusto rin bumati sa inyo. Yung aking partner. No? Anyway, magandang araw sa iyo, Ludwig, at sa ating mga iba pang mga kinikilalang panelists. Pasensyahan nyo na ang boses ko na talagang namamalato ako kasi sana hindi naman COVID. But I would like to greet Mr. Dindo Manhid, Strat-Based ADR Institute President, Congressman PD Barsaga, our chairman in the party, NUP, and House Committee on Natural Resources Chairperson, Yusek Analisa Te, DNR Yusek for Finance and Information System and Climate Change, na aming partner sa Manila, yung DNR. Mga enabler namin yan, mga magagaling na partner ng local government na agency sa national, yung DNR. And I'll mention it later, yung aming mga pinagkagawa pareho bilang pamahalaan. To Dr. Mahar Lagmay, Project NOAA, Sir, Executive Director. Dr. Deo Florence Ondas, Associate Professor and Deputy Director for Research of UP Marine Science Institute. Kay Mr. Guillermo Luz, Chief Resilient Officer of Philippine Disaster Resilient Foundation Ayala Corporation, Associate Director, and other guests. Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Kanina pa ako nanonood sa inyo, natuto ako na it only proves that a private corporation will work hand in hand with the government. We will achieve our goals in protecting our environment and creating sustainable programs for the next generation. In our own little way, one, I agree with Mr. Raymond Rupino, kanina yung nagsasalita, na dapat talaga ang mga lokal na pamahalaan sa policy making. Totoo po yung sinabi niya, no, na makapangyarihan po talaga yung lokal na pamahalaan in approving development, particularly in real property. No? At umasa naman kayo, Raymond Rupino, at 10 ng iyong mga miyembro, na through the leadership of Architect Dennis Lacuna, na siya o talaga, napakahigpit po noon. Napakahirap po kumuha ng mga exemption ng FAR sa lungsod. But don't get us wrong, we approve naman as long as it complies with our direction in making more greener space in the city of Manila. As you all know, na ang Maynila talagang hindi na siguro maikukubli that before I became the mayor, is full of filth. No? Hindi lang sa kalsada, pati sa pag-uugali namin bilang mga pamahalaan o bilang taong pamahalaan. Masyado naming ikinipit balikat yung mga sisimpleng bagay na what we call basic governance. At there's obstruction everywhere, not only the road, no, but also our drainage system. Because if roads are occupied by unnecessary structures, then the drainage system will not be maintained. So sabi ko yan doon sa aking mga sa engineering. Sabi ko, alam nyo, nung bata ako, napakinggan ko sa science, yung basic, no, space occupied by matter, lesser space. If we're not going to clean our drainage system, I'm very sure what happened in the past will continue to happen because we are not able to maintain the cleanliness of our area. Kako, tingnan nyo dito, nung araw, umihilang ang langit, baha na ang Maynila. So with that, we created some small effort in our own little way within our capacity, of course with the help of DNR. We start cleaning up the body of water of any solid waste, solid materials. Not only once or twice, it became a daily habit. We've been cleaning our rivers, creeks for the past 1 year and 4 months. And same way with our drainage system. Mamukat-mukat mo, ito naman po, no, mabanggit ko, ma-share ko lang naman sa inyo. Nalulungkot tayo na nasa kalagitnaan tayo ng pandemya, masyado pa tayong hinahagupit ng mga bagyo. And the recent one is Ulysses. No? At as you all know, modesty aside, no, bumaha ang Metro Manila. Pero sa Manila, for the first time yata siguro nabalitaan ninyo o hindi nyo nabalitaan kasi hindi napabalita dahil hindi po nagbaha sa Maynila. We have some flooding, what we call the gutter deep, no? Yung gabangketa lamang. But hindi ko alam kung may estudyante ng UST rito na nag-aral sa UST or even UP Manila in the corner of Pedro Hill and Top Avenue and Paura and especially Calao, no? At yung aming Lagos Nilad. Mapapasin nyo, nawala lahat ang baha. At yung mga konting baha naman ay nag-subside agad because there is a space underneath. No? with madalit salita, the drainage works. In the likes of Santa Mesa, we had a few hours of challenges because of the San Juan River. When from what we heard, nung nag-release ng tubig sa dam, ay sa amin kami dadap. Sa lahat kasi ng tubig, I think we have some engineers here who will agree with me sa topology ng Metro Manila. All waters coming from the east, which is the mountainous area, medyo mataas, will go and flow towards Manila Bay. Bago dumating sa Manila Bay, sa amin babagsak. But be that as it may, it was managed. So why am I saying this? It's doable, sort of saying, if we in the local government unit will do the basic governance or basic works, like those things that I mentioned. On top of that, since day one, I've been telling our DPS or Department of Public Safety and City Engineering, masyado na nating minaltrato yung mga bakanting lote. May vendor dito, may vendor doon, balak pa ibenta yung park, and so on and so forth. Sabi ko, I want to take it back and give it back to the people. I want you to adopt what Singapore is doing. Singapore, before, they keep on building. Now they're destroying the buildings because they wanted to create open green space for the next generation. So, pag-iisipin natin, bakit ganoon ang naging polisiya ng ibang mga matatayog na bansa? Ibig sabihin, may halaga, may value silang tinitinan for the next generation. Then, just look into it deeply, yung value ng pangangalaga sa kapaligiran ay napakabisang pamamaraan, isa sa mabisang pamamaraan ng pamamahala. So, kami naman, sa maliit naming kaparaanan, we've talked to DNR. We're very grateful to DNR people kasi every time na may gagawin kami, kinukonsulta namin sila. So, we were assessed last year, that for Manila to be more livable and healthy city, they call it a healthy city, we have to create 1,000 hectares of open green space. And I asked them, I cannot do that. Sabi ko, it is near to impossible. It's not impossible, but it's near to impossible. But I have an idea. Yung 1,000 hectares pa, horizontal lang. Sabi noong mga taga-DNR na nagpunta rito, anong ibig nyo sabihin, Yorme? Sabi ko kasi I have an idea of what we call vertical garden. It's being adopted and nagaganap. Ibig sabihin, posible. Sabi, pwede naman. So you will mako-quantify ninyo yung aming open green space. Sabi niya, opo, isasama po namin. Then, as you all know, when we relaunch rehabilitation of Jones Bridge, in the middle of that pavement, makikita ninyo yung vertical garden. And if you have time one of these days and pass by, that mapapaisip kayo paano nabuhay ang halaman sa gitna ng mausok at espaltado at sementadong lupa. So it did happen, and it can happen, and it's doable. And we went further. We've been building and creating more open green space vertically and horizontally. Ang logic ko naman is to cure the air. While there is science that will clean the body of waters through some scientific way. But as of now, as we speak, there is no cure for a dirty air except for more green areas. So, awa ng Diyos, ang Maynila, after a year, when we were assessed, in less than a year, we were certified that we have created 30 hectares of open green space. Na wala pa kaming ginigiba niyan except yung mga pinagtindahan na ginawang perya, ginawang sabungan, ginawang ewan ko kung ano-ano mga pinaggagawa rito sa Maynila na pwedeng pagkakitaan ng politiko. But be that as it may, those are the things of the past. we will continue to protect whatever is left with regard to our heritage, that's one. Two, with regard to our environment. And we will continue to pursue a running and working drainage system. So we may suffer flooding from time to time because of the volume of rainwater that will pour Manila. No? And Manila, I think, although hindi naman pa factual, some saying that we are living below sea level at 3 inches. No? We will continue to do that, and we will continue to address that. At umasa kayong lahat, kila Raymond, no? Yung sa mga realtor, you're welcome to the city of Manila. Come and develop our properties here, and we will follow as much as possible. It's not a perfect government, perfect system, but we are willing to adapt and innovate. So, to cut the long story short, in making greening city, green city, binigyan kami ng DNR ng AQM. No? Yung AQM. AQM is Air Quality Machine. This is an auditing machine. No? Ibig sabihin, hindi pa pwedeng sabi lang ni Yorme, malinis ang hangin sa Loton. O sabi lang ng DNR, malinis ang hangin. No? Because of this machine, we are being audited and we are being guided. So far, as of last week, from the worst, we have a good recording, 45. Ang rate namin is 45 in a busy street of Loton. So, sinishare ko lang, baka may mga ibang local government na in a highly urbanized setting, it's very challenging to create open green space. But it is not a rocket science. It can be done, and it's doable and duplicable. So, sa amin naman, sa dagat, as you all know, the DNR continue to clean Manila Bay with the help of the local government unit. We will make sure that all violators, including us, just so you know, when I found out that Manila Zoo is a violator of blocking facility or like STP, I shut it down immediately so that we can go in line with the policy of the national government. Saka mahirap din yun. Wala na naman kami moral ascendancy to shut down aristocrat or other buildings. Kung kami mismo ay violators din. Sabi ko, the sauce for the gander is the sauce for the goose. Sabi ko sa kanila. Kaya kailangan sumunod tayo. And as we speak, we've been developing facilities for Hospital ng Maynila, STP, and on top of the building of a new hospital, and Manila Zoo, on top of making Manila Zoo a competitive zoo in Asia. Ang ano ko dyan, ang laban ko dyan, Singapore. At tingin ko hindi mananalo sa akin ng Singapore, yung Singapore Zoo, pag natapos yung Manila Zoo. We are very confident that it is a better zoo than Singapore Zoo. But, again, while we aim for better and greener, other things, no, as our aspirations and visions for the city and the people of Manila, we continue to follow our own rules and rules initiated by the national government through DNR. So we're building our own STP also, so that one way or another, you will have a bluer, cleaner, or greener Manila Bay, portion of Manila. Just for your information, Manila Bay is not only Manila. It is just one of the many local government units. I hope they will do the same and cooperate with DNR. So, yun lamang po ang siguro pwede ko ma-share sa inyong mga yung makabuluhan na mga bagong alituntunin at pinag-uusapan. Umasa kayo na although sa mining industry, no, wala naman kayong magiging problema sa amin. Wala kami minahan dito. Nung araw, meron kami dito minahan. Minahan ni Eddie at Patty. Yung recto, no, yung punong-puno ng obstruction. That's a 2-kilometer, 8-lane full of obstruction. And we guarantee you as a promise to you, as a commitment, since day one, no? Hindi na sila makakabalik. At hanggang ngayon, awan ng Diyos, hindi sila nakakabalik. One Luna and Divisoria is passable by vehicular and foot traffic, including bangketa. Non-negotiable yan. These roads should be made available to the general public. And at the same time, we have now access to the main sewerage, main drainage system of in the center of the city. So mag-iingat po kayo. O nga pala ha, let me take this opportunity. May panganib pa ho sa Maynila. While we support the opening of the economy, we must be responsible. You know, we can learn to live with COVID-19. At the same time, we can go back and learn how to go back to work safely. So mag-iingat kayo, may COVID pa po sa Maynila. Maraming salamat sa pagkakataon na ito at umasa kayo. Kakampiyan ninyo ang pamahalang lungsod sa inyong mga layunin at kami ay may tenga. Handa kaming makinig, handa kaming mag-share, handa kaming mag-adapt. Maraming salamat sa inyo.
Maraming salamat po, Mayor. Hope you could still join us during the open forum. At this juncture, I want to introduce to you our moderator for the open forum. He is a trustee and program convener of Strat-based ADR Institute. Let us all welcome Dr. Carlos Primo David.
Thank you, Ludwig. And in behalf of Professor Dean Dumanhit and the rest of us in the ADR Institute, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone, all our speakers and panelists this morning for providing an update on their individual initiatives and providing ideas for moving forward. In the interest of time, we will only have 15 minutes for our Q&A, but I'd just like to remind all our panelists that if you click on your Q&A button at the bottom, there are specific questions to you from our audience, and therefore I encourage you to go to the Q&A part of this Zoom meeting to answer these questions. Okay, so I'd like to start our discussion with one of the central themes of our webinar, which is on sustainable cities. Maraming examples ang binigay sa atin ni Mayor Isko, but I'd like to first talk about something that's really not talked about openly. In a New York Times article, it argues that environmentalism is a luxury. And this includes having a livable city, having larger open spaces than what we have right now, providing green buildings, and so on and so forth. And rightly so, there is really a need to invest in these projects. But I argue that it is the right moment. It is just ripe that we actually do these investments. Because we are talking about not only having livable cities for our own welfare, but also in terms of protection from natural calamities and the like. And so I'd like to ask first our panelists who talked about sustainable cities, Mr. Luz, Mr. Raymond Rufino, and Architect Luna, meron bang aspect ng inyong concept na medyo we can think of it as low-lying fruits? In other words, the entry point towards having green buildings and sustainable cities won't require so much of an investment, just so that we can show all our communities that these concepts can be done. So any of you can chime in. Raymond, Mr. Bill Luz, go ahead. Maybe you can start, Mr. Rufino.
Sure. Thank you. Again, thank you, Mayor Isko, for the kind words earlier. If we talk about on the city level, I think low-hanging fruit that does not require significant investment, it really is if the LGU can adopt a green building framework for planning and development across a city. So the investment of an LGU would really be capacity building. making sure that you have the right professionals in place, the right procedures, protocols. The Philippine Green Building Council has had a lot of success working with cities. Mandaue City is one of the best examples that has adopted a green building framework for the city. So it does not take a huge investment on the side of the city, but the impact of that is really very powerful, because imagine if you're able to adopt the green building framework at the city level, that affects all of the buildings within your municipality. So the impact
Perfect.
versus the investment is really outsized for me, no? So that's something that I would like to,
Yeah, I think,
put forward.
Mr. Rufino, that's a very concrete suggestion, which will not take that much of an investment. No, just have some of the principles of green buildings be put in place in the building codes of our city. Sana nakikinig si Mayor Isko, and to reach out to you to have this in their programs. Mr. Architect Luna, do you want to say a little bit about
Maybe just to
doing
add.
it sustainably, no, in terms of investments as well?
Talking about low-hanging fruit, I think a good place to start would be at the community level, no? From the ground up, engaging the community. We have seen how the pandemic crisis actually fostered solidarity. They started sharing, they started growing their own food. Now, this happens from the ground up, people and communities taking initiative. And maybe that is indicative of how we can now start to institutionalize these things, so that it's not just in times of crisis that we engage the community or allow them to empower themselves, basically. But what if we can focus on structuring communities so that they are more invested in their neighborhoods? Or maybe, since we're talking about zoning, institutionalize urban farming so that there is a level of resiliency at the community level. So I think
We probably needed a global issue like a pandemic in order for us to look at our cities differently, and hopefully continue some of these projects like urban gardening as a way of life and not just as a response to the pandemic. Thank you for your response.
Thank you.
Mr. Luz, you want to add a few more things?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was just going to say, I think success lies in merging the uh, element of a return on the investment, of some economic rationale to do something, so that there's some payback you feel as a result of the investment or the effort you put into it. And then it becomes a sort of a self-reinforcing uh, cycle. For instance, many years ago, uh, there was a massive switch, in light bulbs 20 years ago or so, when people started moving to low wattage light bulbs. And, ultimately, people will continue that habit because their consumption goes down. Just imagine if we translate that practice into other practices. I think we just need an economic model married to a sustainable environmental model.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there, Mr. Luz, because when we talk about environmentalism, the payback is actually not concrete. It's not monetary, but it's also long term, and therefore planning with the aid of government so that we don't steer away from the plan and see that the fruits further in the future, because the investments do not go back to communities and to people right away.
Mhm. Well, talk to Raymond. I mean, they've seen it as their investments have had a payback to them, no, and to their tenants. So it's the same thing. That's the philosophy we need to just practice, I guess.
Uh, and therefore that includes convincing our leaders in government and the LGUs that there is indeed a payback when we do these environmental programs.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Luz.
If I can just add, Bill's right. No, I think a lot of people have the impression that going green does not give a return, and I'd really like to sort of really change that mindset, because really investing, if you invest properly in green, sustainable, and resilient strategies, there is a payback for sure. It's maybe not so clear to everyone in the beginning, but if you talk to people who have been investing in sustainability, resilience for many, many years, I'm sure they will tell you that those investments have paid off, just like Bill mentioned. No?
Okay.
So there's a business case for it, no? It's
There
not
is a
just it's not just doing something good that makes you feel good inside. There's a real business case to all
there's
of
an
this. No?
ROI, a real monetary ROI. Thank you, Sir Rufino. And including government, when we talk about sustainable cities, of course, there are private sector initiatives that we heard this morning, but they can only be sustained if it becomes uh, a government initiative, a nationwide initiative. For example, some of the efforts of PDRF and Ayala Corp, no, in building healthy environments will actually not prosper, no, in the future if we are not able to solve some endemic problems such as reducing rural to urban area migration, or if we are unable to implement our rules strictly, for example, zoning and ensuring that our waterways are clear of any obstructions like communities, no, along rivers. Mahirap i-balance for sure. No? So I'd like to ask Yusek Annalisa Te and maybe Mayor Isko if he's still around. How do you balance that? No, we know what we need to do, pero malaking problema yung people aspect in terms of zoning and land use. Yusek Te, do you have any
Well,
idea
actually,
how to do that?
that's the critical role of the government, no, to provide for the enabling policies so that all these initiatives uh, will be replicated or even scaled up. Um, the role of the LGU is very needed because they should be able to do proper land use management, and I hope that the bill on the land use will be passed already so that we can have a framework on how we can properly zone the city. And we have several policies like the Balik Provincia, or initiatives like the Balik Provincia, so that we can encourage um, uh, informal settlers or even urban poor communities to go back to provinces. But of course, the key there is to provide livelihood and economic opportunities in the provinces. We have to also develop. It's really an integrated approach that the government should do. And of course, the role of enforcement of our existing laws like um, water quality management in the urban centers is also necessary. So we have to do all those things so that we can promote sustainable cities.
And related to what you mentioned, Yusek Te, for example, if we talk about the disaster that recently happened with Typhoon Ulysses, ayaw natin, no, as Filipinos, we steer away from the sisihan aspect of disasters. But at some point, we need to analyze it and see where the gaps again, no, because it cannot be happening this often to us. Uh, what do you think about the accountability of government agencies and even LGUs when we are unable uh, to respond correctly to these disasters? Parang walang accountability aspect.
Well, actually, all existing laws provide for accountabilities of government officials, no, involved. And maybe what we can really do is enforce that. Kailangan din natin magpasample. Now, for example, in the case of the DNR, Secretary Simato already ordered an assessment on the quarrying and logging operations in those areas, no, so that we can really see who are the accountable offices. Meron bang neglect or meron ba talagang failure in the monitoring para ma-assess din natin maigi what should be done. Of course, nakita natin we really have to do more or enhance watershed management, more enforcement of our laws. But you're right, we should also look at the accountability so that it can provide a good signal that we are serious in ensuring that the government is doing its role.
Okay, thank you, Yusek. And at this point, I'd like to bring in our scientists, Dr. Lagmay and Dr. Onda. No, parang every time we know what the problem is from the science perspective, but somehow what we know from research are not able to be translated into policies or definitely into action. Meron ba kayong concrete na suggestions on how we are going to go about moving forward so that our research are able to be translated properly? Deo or Mahar, if you're there.
Yeah, siguro I'll start. Thank you for
Go
the
ahead.
question. Yeah, two things that we are advocating. Yes, it's very true na yung knowledge doesn't always translate into action. And I think there's a big gap between the public and the scientists and also the policymakers. So for us, at least in the marine science field, it worked in a couple of ways that when we used citizen science, for example, we allowed the public to actually contribute data to us using some mechanisms. For example, in plastics, we're developing a mechanism where we can just take pictures and then send it to us. We're GPS tagged, and then we can create a database of the distribution of plastics. It allows the public to get directly involved in the data gathering, and there's a certain level of data ownership, and that allows them to be directly connected to the science behind. And they become curious. They ask, para saan to? Anong gamit nito? So by that, yung sinabi ni Dr. Lagmay kanina, we build trust between the scientists and the public. And when the scientists suggest, mas madali na siyang papakinggan. We've been working on this with different communities, and mas malaki talaga yung participation because they get to understand the science but they also get to contribute. I think the second is science communication. Sabi nga ni Dr. Lagmay kanina, I also believe scientists are good researchers, but we are not good communicators, and we need to acknowledge that. So I think we need to work with other disciplines such as the communications and the humanities. So I think yun, citizen science and science communication.
Thank you, Dr. Onda. Mahar, you want to add to what Dr. Onda mentioned? You're still there?
Yeah, I'm here, CP.
Go ahead, Mahar.
Yes, I agree. The science communication is very important. Crowdsourcing, citizen science. All of these things are very important in our efforts on building resilience and making sustainable cities. No? You had a question kanina about what do you call this? A question on how do we get the low-lying fruits? So what are these low-lying fruits? No?
Yes.
And I'm just going to siguro talk about how we can interconnect this with policies and the question that you are asking me now. Actually, the low-lying fruits are there already. No, they're already in our laws, and it's just a matter of enforcement. We have the Clean Air Act, we have the Water Code, we have the Building Code, we have all of these things. No? And they also, in some parts, it's not part of the law. As we know it, it's not an act, but it's in the policies of NEDA, like yung open data, it's there. No? Open data allows us to check and counter-check what are being enforced, no, na nasa law. No? Kasi without the data, we cannot say anything, no, if it's being implemented or not being implemented. And that is the usefulness of science na open sa public, no, that we can check. Kasi without that facility for us to check, how can we make an accusation kumbaga that it's not being enforced? Correct. It's just like saying that, oh, ikaw ginagawa mo to, but without any proof, we cannot do anything beyond that, diba? So these low-lying fruits are really just around, no? Parang meron tayong, ang dami, there's so many, no? The use of mga technologies, it's in the policies of government, it's in the law, yung mga Clean Air Act na sinasabi ko, for building sustainable cities, no? Ayun, we just have to enforce them, but we cannot enforce them if we do not have data, no? So I think with data science, with analytics, with the current moves to make data more available to everybody, with the academe working together with government, crunching the numbers, the statistics, analyzing the data, we can pinpoint areas that have problems, no? So yun ang
We probably need more scientists in government and
That's
in
right. That's right.
legislation.
Correct. And I think there are moves. No, many researchers are now integrating with congressmen, mga lawmakers. These lawmakers, consulting scientists. I'm sure you are being consulted by senators and congressmen. No, but somehow merong conflicting interests din, no? So sometimes yung recommended research policies are not being implemented. But I think the bottom line to your question is that if we are able to get all of these data out, analysis out, there's better trust in science, there's more data available, better learning, more generation of knowledge, we can address many of the problems that you are raising.
We can start with that. Okay, thanks, Mahar.
Thank you, CP.
I found this definition of community resilience, which I hope everybody would appreciate. It says that community resilience is the creation and utilization of resources by a community to thrive in an environment characterized by change, uncertainty, and unpredictability. Definitely within the last few weeks, we saw that the environment is changing, it is uncertain and unpredictable. And so I was asking myself, what are we talking about resources here that need to be created and utilized? So I came up with a list. Maybe you can add to this. But resources mean obviously funding, mainly from government, but also from the private sector. Knowledge is a resource that primarily comes from technical personnel like scientists and engineers and architects. We need a proactive leadership in order for us to be able to utilize these resources. And sometimes being on the science side, this is where the gap that we usually see, no, in terms of the leadership. And finally, partnerships, because government alone cannot do this by itself. And therefore, we need more partnerships with the private sector, PDRF, and all the private initiatives need to be in partnership with government at some point in time. Siguro at this point, I'd like to close our discussion. It's been a long half day and I certainly learned a lot from all of you. If you've heard a project or a concept today that you wish to partner in or be involved with, definitely please network with your respective panelists or even contact them through ADR Institute. But definitely if we are able to show you or present to you something that is of interest and in line with what you're doing, then this webinar has done a small part in integrating all our efforts towards a better society. Maraming salamat. And so again, in behalf of Dindo, thank you. Ludwig, thank you for hosting the webinar this morning. Thank you to all our panelists. This is being recorded and will be shared to you guys and to a larger audience in the future. Maraming salamat po. Happy lunch.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.